Chapter 318. Demon Transforming Beast. Beligaju narrowed his eyes. When he heard the name again, there was an obvious coldness in his eyes that was not there before. Of course, Fire Chelan knew what he was thinking. Demon Transforming Beast was different from other evil beasts. This kind of evil beast had more complicated thoughts than human beings. It could create illusions and get into human bodies to control them. Back then, the Empress was controlled by Demon Transforming Beast. That was why Beligaju was treated so harshly. Of course, it was also related to the fact that the Empress disliked Beligaju since he was young. When she was pregnant with Beligaju, the Emperor started to be obsessed with women. She thought it was the child in her belly that delayed him. No matter how the people around her advised her to give birth to a prince so that she could have glory in the future, her resentment toward Beligaju did not subside. However, the Empress did not say that she did not want this child. She thought she could use this child to win the Emperor's heart back. However, what the Empress did not expect was that the Emperor did not change his mind. Instead, he spent more and more time with Murong. Therefore, the Empress did not take Beligaju seriously. She thought that giving birth to a prince was equivalent to not giving birth at all. In the future, no matter how outstanding Beligaju was, he was greatly discounted in her eyes. The Empress only had the Emperor in her heart. It was difficult for her to care about other people. It was the same even if that person was her own son. Therefore, this gave Demon Transforming Beast a chance to invade and control a person with inner demons. It was easier than controlling other people. That day, the Empress called Beligaju to the palace and called him a good-for-nothing. Then, she pounced on him. Although its appearance and His Highness's sharp eyes scared the Demon Transforming Beast away, the damage was done. The Empress thought it was Beligaju who wanted to hurt her. The scissors fell and cut Beligaju's face. Blood was everywhere. Fire Chelan knew that it was not that its master could not dodge the scissors. It was because he thought it was the closest person to him. Because of this, the Empress feared him and sent him out of the palace. In less than a year, the Empress died. It was said that her body was too weak. Fire Chelan knew that its master had a bad childhood. However, the more the master was like this, the more it needed. Therefore, it had no opinion on what the Empress had done. But now, the Demon Transforming Beast appeared again. The Fire Chelan stretched out its claws and furrowed its eyebrows. Beligaju, on the other hand, was thinking about something else. His eyes turned cold as he ordered the person beside him, "Go and find out what the Battle Spirit Forces has been up to recently." Shadow respectfully bowed his head and retreated. The headmaster stood in front and announced loudly, "The test begins." He didn't know if it was a small world, or if it was just a coincidence. Hellion Vivian and Yunbiluo were assigned to the same team. Amidst the continuous laughter, he had already intentionally or unintentionally started to glance in Wei Wei's direction. That kind of gaze was already very obvious. It was nothing more than a ridicule waiting to watch a good show. Qin Zhan saw this scene when she walked over quickly. She did not interrupt the headmaster who was teaching the method of summoning the sacred beast. But when she saw Yunbiluo smile again, she swallowed all her words. She thought that Yunbiluo did not know that Beligaju was in the academy. She wanted to talk to Hellion Vivian after passing the test. Yunbiluo saw through her little hesitation. They were both death servants, so she knew better than Qin Zhan what this girl was thinking when she grew up. Perhaps in front of others, death servants would hide their emotions well. But Yunbiluo's advantage was that she could see through such concealment. Yunbiluo smiled, but her eyes darkened. Thinking about it, she had only left for a short while, but this girl's heart was completely biased towards an outsider. He Zhu might not know that His Highness was in the White Academy, but as Hellion Vivian's personal maid, how could she not know where His Highness was? She just didn't want to tell her. Be it Qing Zhan or Shadow. They were all the same. Yun Biluo turned her gaze and looked at Hellion Vivian. The headmaster had finished introducing the things that everyone should pay attention to. He said to Yun Biluo, "Biluo, give everyone a demonstration first." "Yes." Yun Biluo stepped forward. Her beautiful face always gave people an indescribable sense of intimacy. She moved her fingers and a long sword appeared in her palm. The long sword was glowing. Coupled with her long sleeves that fluttered in the air, she looked like a fairy descending from the ninth heaven. Every move of hers attracted the attention of the headmaster and the students. Hellion Jiao watched this scene and the corners of her mouth curved upwards. She pretended to inadvertently brush past Hellion Wei, her voice carrying a thick sense of ridicule. "You think that because you're married to the third prince, you're truly free of worries. Open your eyes wide and look carefully. That's the person that the third prince likes. The third prince married you to deal with the retired emperor, and to use you as her substitute. But look at yourself, you don't have the looks, and the only thing you know is martial arts. The third prince hasn't seen Miss Yun yet, but if he does, what do you think you are? You don't even deserve to carry her shoes." After she finished speaking, she wanted to see Hellion Vivian lose her wits. Unexpectedly, that person just sneered and looked back at her. Her thin lips slowly spat out a word, "Get lost." Hellion Jiao's face turned completely ugly. Her fingers made creaking sounds, and she looked at Hellion Vivian with a pair of poisonous eyes. Hellion Wei curved her thin lips, as if she was indifferent enough to infuriate someone to death. "Let's see who will have the last laugh." Hellion Jiao waved her long sleeves and walked to the headmaster's side. Yun Biluo held the long sword with her fingers. She glanced at Hellion Vivian intentionally and said, "Wake up." A rumbling sound was heard. Something in the forest of fantasy at the back of the mountain seemed to be summoned, and there was a roaring sound. Just by the sound, one could tell that it was a big guy. The onlookers looked at each other and looked at Yun Biluo with admiration. Even the headmaster stroked his long beard and nodded with satisfaction. Yun Biluo lifted her long sleeves and said, "Rise." The roaring sound became more and more obvious. It came from afar and approached. A pair of crimson wings flew up from the forest, then skimmed over the roof and stopped firmly in front of Yun Biluo. "It's a double-winged beast. God, I haven't seen such a huge double-winged beast. Look, its whole body is on fire. It's amazing." The students were excited, but the headmaster stopped them all. "You can go after it's tamed." It was not easy to tame such a huge double-winged beast. Chapter 319. However, Yun Biluo did not seem to care about this. She cut her finger as she waved her long sword. The blood splashed onto the double-winged beast's face. Then, she said, "Keep." The crimson eyes of the double-winged beast gradually dimmed as if it was being controlled by someone. Its movements became gentler, but its eyes made people feel uncomfortable. However, the bystanders could not see this scene at all. Every student was excited to be able to summon such a huge double-winged beast. Seeing that the double-winged beast had quietened down, everyone ran over and surrounded the double-winged beast, looking left and right. It was their first time observing a spirit beast that was summoned directly from the forest of fantasy at such a close distance. They chatted excitedly. Yun Biluo retracted her hand and stood in front of the double-winged beast. She smiled gently at the crowd, looking very gentle and beautiful. Qing Zhan's face turned pale in an instant. Not because of anything else. It was because His Highness was looking at them too. Hellion Jiao was happier than anyone else at this moment because she had not tasted the feeling of stepping on that little bitch for a long time. This was definitely a good opportunity. With a pair of sinister eyes, she was only thinking of letting the third prince know that Yunbiluo was back as soon as possible through this test. That way, she could avoid the misfortune of marrying Huai and after this semester. Because by then, Yunbiluo would definitely listen to their arrangement and help her to plead with the third prince. As long as she could get out of this, she could regroup and climb up again. She would not give up. Since young, she was much better than that little bitch. Why should she be the one to marry into the palace? Helian Jiaoer narrowed her eyes. She would like to see how she, the third princess consort, would lose to a foreign freshman. Princess consort. Qing Zhan retracted her gaze and held Helian Vivian's hand worriedly. Her body was half tilted, as if she wanted to block Beligaju's sight. Helian Vivian glanced at her. Qing Zhan, even if you cover it like this, he will see it sooner or later if he wants to. It's useless, move away. Qing Zhan looked at Helian Vivian's indifferent eyes. She lowered her arm and stood aside. She lowered her eyes and said, yes. Across the crowd. Yunbiluo finally met Beligaju's gaze. Looking at the man's slightly furrowed brows, she smiled. She knew that His Highness had never forgotten her. As expected. Yunbiluo lowered her eyes, and there was more affection in them. Helian Vivian watched this scene. The pain in his lower abdomen never stopped. But it didn't affect her expression. Come to think of it, other than the fact that Beligaju chose her because she was interesting, perhaps the rest was to make use of her. This was how it should be. People who approached her always had ulterior motives. In this world, she was an orphan with no power or influence. What was the purpose of a prince marrying her? Just like this body, she used to like Murong Chongfeng so much. In order to attract his attention, she even went to the East House to ask for money from Madame Su. She also picked up Helian Jiaoer's clothes to wear. Since everyone liked Helian Jiaoer and he looked at Helian Jiaoer with a gentle gaze, would he not hate her so much if she wore Helian Jiaoer's clothes? Only she knew how much complaints and disdain she had to endure in order to wear the clothes she wore. She didn't have a mother, and she didn't have a maid to order around. All her efforts were just to bring back the childhood Murong Chongfeng. However, every time, she only got his disgust. And the laughter of those young masters and the sarcasm of those young ladies. What was Murong Chongfeng doing at that time? He was watching coldly from the sidelines. He would even be worse than those people, and give her a hard time. Because she was no longer useful, because she was no longer the superior successor of the Helian family, because she had no power behind her. Here, family background was very important. When Beligaju chose her, it was probably because of her tattered family background. He waited until this step, when there was no other power involved, and he could divorce her as he wished. If he married another young lady from a prestigious family, he would have to deal with so many trivial matters. It was undeniable that Beligaju had a good plan. But things weren't so long-winded. She had already said that if he needed, she could give up her position to the person in his heart at any time. What's more, the two of them had agreed to cooperate from the very beginning. She had been doing business for so many years, and there was nothing that she didn't follow the rules in. He really didn't understand her. Helian Vivian retracted her gaze and saw Yunbiluo seemingly smiling at her. The rest were waiting to see how she was going to summon the spirit beasts. The last time she entered the forest of fantasy, she had the help of the royal family, otherwise she wouldn't have come out safely. This time, it was different from the forest of fantasy. The spirit beasts that were summoned were generally more ferocious than those in the forest of fantasy. Most importantly, not everyone could summon the spirit beasts here. There were already a few people in the inferior compound who couldn't summon the spirit beasts, and even some of the people in the good compound with poor qualifications could only sigh. In comparison, the probability of Helian Vivian summoning the spirit beasts was very low. But the next one to be summoned was not Hellion Vivian. It was Jing Wuxuang. He put one hand in front of his pale lips and coughed softly. Facing the admiring eyes, he smiled warmly at the teacher. Teacher, although my meridians are still there, I couldn't practice martial arts since I was young, let alone summon the spirit beasts. So I won't waste your time, let the next person start. Couldn't practice martial arts since you were young? The teacher looked at him, who had a dignified appearance and was knowledgeable, and shook his head regretfully. The dean did tell me about your situation, so you can only watch from the side. If you're too tired, just tell me. Okay. Jing Wuxuang was always reserved. After this conversation, almost everyone knew that this jade-like handsome freshman was sick and had no offensive power. The male students breathed a sigh of relief. They were really worried that there would be another one like the two powerful bastards from the inferior compound. It seemed that the freshman this time was very ordinary except for his face. The male students nodded satisfactorily and turned back to continue summoning the spirit beasts. If that's the case, then the next student will summon directly, the teacher said calmly. The next student was Hellion Vivian. The Hellion Jower couldn't wait to watch a good show. Hellion Wei Wei merely smiled, put on a blazing green fur robe, and strolled to the location of the main courtyard. Her steps were very steady, her posture was straight, her wide long sleeves fluttered in the wind, making her look like a queen walking in the darkness. Chapter 320. What kind of mythical beast do you think she will summon? At most, it will be a small storm beast. I doubt if she can summon one. Hellion Vivian ignored their comments and nodded at the teacher. The teacher reached out and opened the enchantment. Hellion Vivian stood against the light, her black eyes reflecting a thin ray of light. Yuan Ming smiled evilly and glanced at Little White, who was also smiling. Hellion Vivian moved her hand and the air around her was surrounded by an invisible airflow. At this time, people had not seen this strange phenomenon. They only saw Hellion Vivian standing there motionlessly, which made them want to mock her even more. Who knew that at this time, Hellion Vivian opened her 5 fingers and her long sleeves fluttered in the air. Her voice was clear and deafening. Come out. 5 words. It did not seem like a spell that should be used for summoning. But it caused the earth to shake. Everyone had not realized what had happened. They only heard a rumbling sound. The ground under Hellion Vivian's feet cracked, and the hot air behind her created huge sparks. They bloomed little by little and then faded little by little. It was very unusual. However, the dark underground began to stir. It was because he smelled a beautiful fragrance. What a fragrant soul! Under the black cloak, the pale lips curved into a sinister smile. Saliva dripped from the tip of the scarlet tongue and fell to the ground drop by drop. Bailey Jiaju, who was standing in the distance, suddenly narrowed his eyes. His handsome side profile carried a frosty expression like ice. Master. Fire Qilin also noticed the strange smell in the air. It turned sideways and flew out with Beligaju. The rest were the students who did not know what was going on. After all, there was no follow-up after such a big commotion. So basically, they just looked at each other and muttered, all bark and no bite. Hellion Vivian was still standing in the middle of the rising clouds. She moved her fingers and her aura was like a rainbow. Her eyes were half closed and she repeated, "Come out." Boom! Another series of violent sounds rang out. What is that? All of a sudden, someone shouted something. The students frowned and couldn't help but look behind her. He instantly sucked in a deep breath. Their eyes slowly narrowed. Slowly. A black silhouette that looked like a long snake appeared faintly among the layers of clouds. Then, it gradually revealed its full appearance. He had the head of a qilin, the tail of a carp, a long beard, deer-like horns, and 5 mighty claws. That pair of eyes filled with hostility rippled like jade-green waves, sparkling under the light. Standing on the precipice, his feet stepped on the sun, moon, and stars. That was not a snake at all, but a gigantic azure dragon. The azure dragon seemed to have just woken up from a deep sleep. Its body was still bound by a long iron chain. Its eyes were half narrowed as it looked at the crowd under its feet. Its eyes were filled with anger. Why did it come out? Little White's cold voice carried a worried tone. Woman, why did you summon it? Helene Vivian was more innocent than it. I didn't just say it out loud. Then you're finished. It hates humans the most. After Little White finished speaking, it added, it's as difficult to deal with as the Fire Cheelin. Fire Cheelin. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. It's that powerful. A big guy from the ancient times. Don't you think it's powerful? Yuan Ming smiled evilly. Have you heard of the Azure Dragon? It's the Azure Dragon. Helene Vivian smiled playfully. One of the 4 mythical beasts. Aha! Yuan Ming shrugged. At this time, the students were already dumbfounded. The Azure Dragon in front of them was so huge. Other than gaping at it, they had forgotten everything else. Helene Zhouer's face was almost twisted with jealousy. She clenched her fingers tightly and looked at all this with resentment. The teacher could only stare blankly at the dragon's eyes. He felt that if it opened its mouth at this time, he would be blown away by the huge airflow. What to do? He had never encountered such a situation. When the students were summoning the mythical beasts, they actually woke up the sleeping dragon god in the back mountain. How could this end? The great masters who taught at the White Academy all knew that there was a huge Meow Lake behind the mountain. It was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Regardless of whether it was dry or dry all year round, it did not affect the growth of rare flowers and plants. It was all because there was a huge azure dragon lying in the lake. For so many years, the azure dragon had been sleeping in the back mountain. Today, it woke up. To be more precise, it was awakened by the noise. The azure dragon looked at the humans who were as small as ants and then turned its head. Its eyes met with Helene Vivian's eyes that did not show any resistance. The azure dragon's eyes narrowed slightly. Was it this little thing that woke it up? What was that behind her? A white cat. Ah, the descendant of Baizé. And the other one, the azure dragon frowned. It was a demon. Now humans dared to fight demons. Interesting. However, didn't she know that it hated it when people disturbed its sleep? The huge azure dragon coldly retracted its gaze and was about to teach this human a lesson. Then, he saw a small person running towards him from underneath his feet. The little man's bald head patted his claws and said confidently, "Such a big dragon, it must be delicious to eat." The azure dragon, everyone, oh no. Where did young Uncle Master go? The teacher was the first to react. He covered his face as if he was about to collapse. No dragon could tolerate it when it heard that someone wanted to eat it. Moreover, young Uncle Master, you naughty child. Of all things to eat, you just had to eat the dragon god. How did the dean teach you? It's okay to bully us usually, but this is the dragon god, the dragon god. How are you going to eat it? Braised? Steamed? Little Bald Head studied for a while before he realized that his invincible third brother was not standing beside him. The little person was a little confused, but this did not affect his pursuit of delicacies. He squatted down and poked the dragon claws with his fingers. His fierce little face was full of seriousness. How do I eat it? The teacher took a deep breath. He had no choice but to wave his sleeves. All students, step back. The azure dragon would definitely be angry. Yun Biluo stood among the students and her eyes slowly widened. The Hellion Jower pretended to be weak and took a deep breath. My eldest sister is used to being careless. This time she summoned something, but she got herself into big trouble. Upon hearing this, everyone's shock when they first saw the azure dragon was replaced by a faint disgust. Speaking of which, Hellion Vivian did not even know how to recite spells. She probably did not have the ability to tame the azure dragon. However, the little seventh prince was probably in danger. No one dared to touch the dragon god's claws. Chapter 321. However, at this moment, in a flash, Hellion Wei Wei carried the little seventh prince over. With a light tap of her toes, she retreated a few meters backward. Then, she straightened her body and looked at the green dragon indifferently. The azure dragon had laughed coldly when it heard that someone wanted to eat it. It reached out its claws and wanted to crush the person. Now that it saw that someone had snatched its prey, its eyes revealed a murderous glint. However, as an ancient divine beast, it was naturally more polite than other spiritual beasts. Before killing someone, it had to be polite before resorting to force. Human. The azure dragon looked at Hellion Vivian and slowly opened its mouth. Let go of the little guy and I'll forgive you for waking me up. Otherwise, I'll crush both of you into meat patties. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and realized that the azure dragon was using consciousness to communicate. She narrowed her eyes and said, I'm very sorry for waking you up. You can see that our academy is conducting a summoning test. I don't know what happened, but I've summoned you. I can apologize for that, but I can't hand this little guy over to you. Human, you're very bold. However, the azure dragon waved its huge tail and laughed coldly. No one has ever dared to escape from my wrath. As it spoke, its huge claws descended. When it landed on the ground, the entire academy seemed to shake. The students were thrown into disarray by this attack. Some fell, while others dropped their belongings. Hellion Vivian quickly dodged with the little guy in her arms. When the azure dragon raised its claws, it glanced at the ground again. With a scornful look, it stomped down again. Hellion Vivian thought that she would be able to escape this time as well. She did not expect that the azure dragon's claws would carry such a strong murderous aura. Even though Hellion Wei Wei managed to avoid being trampled by the claws, her internal organs were also shaken by the baleful aura. Her whole body also followed and fell downwards. The azure dragon thought that she was definitely going to die this time. It was about to follow up with a second stomp. Swoosh! Hellion Vivian quickly got up. She held the umbrella with her fingers and flew into the air. Then, she swooped down and put the little guy down. Then, she turned around beautifully. Her left hand grabbed the iron chain that was imprisoning the azure dragon. Roar! A dragon's roar. Everyone covered their ears. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Even the wind and clouds were churning. However, Hellion Wei Wei stood upright in the middle of the whirlpool, her hand still gripping that long iron chain, without the slightest intention of letting go. The azure dragon turned its head to the side, wanting to get rid of her, but unknowingly, she was already riding on its body. Hey, boss dragon, do you want to get rid of this iron chain? Hellion Wei Wei sat on the dragon's back with bloodstains at the corner of her mouth, but her expression was more excited than ever. If you want, I can help you undo it, but there is one condition. You must obey my orders. The azure dragon coldly snorted, Human, are you dreaming? Do you know what this iron chain is made of? It's made of the ultimate black ice iron. It's engraved with the seal of an ancient god. Can you undo it? The seal only works on beasts. I'm not a beast. Hellion Vivian's thin lips curled up. Also, this iron chain is not that difficult to undo. Any cold weapon has its button. You just need to find it. The Azure Dragon was silent for a while. A long time ago, I swore that I would only be loyal to one person. Although that person has disappeared, I'm still waiting for him. So, I can't obey your orders. That's easy. Hellion Vivian wiped the back of her hand. We don't need to sign a contract. You only need to help me 3 times. After that, I'll let you go and find your master. You're trapped here. Even if your master shows up, you won't know. Why don't you cooperate with me? The Azure Dragon narrowed his eyes and tossed about in the clouds. Can you really undo the mysterious ice iron chain? Yes. Hellion Wei Wei lowered her eyes and looked at the iron chain in her palm. However, it will take some time. Boss Long, please don't move for now. I will be responsible for whoever you trample to death underground. After all, I was the one who summoned you. The Azure Dragon replied with a deep voice, but it was a little strange that a human could summon it. However, it didn't think too much about it. Because the black ice iron chain on its body had trapped it for too long. 1,000 years ago. The palace fell and its master disappeared. It wanted to find the humans and ask for an explanation. So it roamed the world and burned countless villages and cities. It angered the god of tribulation and locked it at the bottom of the Green Dragon Lake for 1,000 years. For 1,000 years, its initial anger gradually turned into disappointment. In the end, it became dead calm. It began to accept the fact that its master was gone and lost all interest in the world. In the end, it fell asleep at the bottom of the lake. It had forgotten what sunlight tasted like. If it wasn't for this girl, it would still be muddle-headed, holding on to the hope of dying, waiting for its master. Now, it could finally get rid of the iron chain. No matter how introverted the Azure Dragon was, Hellion Vivian knew how much it wanted to get out of the cage from the light in its eyes. Hellion Vivian didn't waste any time. She followed the iron chain and descended quickly. Her purpose was to find the source of the iron chain. The students didn't know what was going on. They only saw the Azure Dragon's big mouth moving and thought that it had swallowed Hellion Vivian whole and was now chewing her bones. Hellion Jower laughed sinisterly. She didn't expect that bitch to dig her own grave in the end. How satisfying. However, Yun Biluo didn't think that it was that simple. The blood serpent beast that was supposed to respond to her lost connection at this moment. How could this be? Yun Biluo looked up in confusion and saw Hellion Vivian climbing down the iron chain. She didn't die. She was going to unlock the iron chain. Once the iron chain was unlocked, the dragon god would recognize her as its master. She had to stop her. Yun Biluo's eyes flashed. She lowered her arm and black blood flowed to the ground. She seemed to be chanting a spell. Bang! The creatures below were getting more and more restless. As if it was enlightened, its blood-red eyes suddenly shook. It wanted to get up again, but it was blocked by a figure in black with long hair. That person was very handsome. He had a cold and noble figure. He was wearing a long robe that reached his knees, but there wasn't a single speck of dust on his body. There was a faint smile on his lips. However, the magical snake beast felt a deep fear in its body. It was an oppression that came from the depths of its blood. It locked its throat tightly and froze its body subconsciously. Who is this person? Chapter 322. As for the blood snake's reaction, the fire Qilin didn't think much of it. Its respected master was always elegant and lofty, and he didn't make a move easily. But as long as he made a move, a simple raise of his eyebrows was enough to make all beasts tremble. However, the other party didn't seem to understand this. They even showed off their disgusting, sharp, poisonous fangs. The fire Qilin had never liked snakes. These cold and gloomy beasts were its natural enemy. The blood snake didn't see the fire Qilin because Beligaju hadn't released it yet. The blood serpent gradually recovered from its shock and started hissing. Its eyes, which symbolized evil and greed, narrowed into slits. It was ready to bite the neck of the man in front of it at any moment. Beligaju held the wings of the night god with one hand and said coldly, "Were you the one who emitted the disgusting smell?" Drip. Another drop of black blood fell on the snake's head. "It's me. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect a human to be able to detect my presence. But it doesn't matter because you're going to die soon." As it spoke, the blood snake's pupils constricted and it pounced toward Bailey Jiaju. However, Bailey Jiaju just stood there and didn't even move. The fox fur cloak draped over his body didn't have the slightest trace of blemish. Every strand of lustrous fur was blown by the wind and not the slightest bit messed up. The blood snake opened its mouth, but before it could bite down, it was flung a few meters away by Lu Xian's hand. "Stupid," he said coldly. As the man approached, the blood snake felt an unprecedented sense of danger. It shook its gigantic head twice, then slyly swung its tail, stirring up countless dust and gravel. Beligaju narrowed his eyes and walked in the middle of the gravel. His fingers were wrapped in black gloves and hung casually by his sides. "Tisk, tsk, tsk. You don't understand." Amidst the pervading dust, Bailey Jiaju's pair of eyes revealed a faint cold light. The smile at the corner of his mouth became evil and bloodthirsty. When the blood snake saw this, it ran even faster. After all, it had never seen a human walk out of the flying rubble. Beligaju opened his mouth and bit off the glove on his hand. On his wrist, there were black tattoos that looked like vines. That familiar brand caused the blood snake's expression to change completely. It no longer cared about anything else and charged into the sky. Hellion Vivian was still holding on to the long chain, leaning forward to climb down. She didn't expect that a 7-foot-long python would suddenly jump out from behind her. After seeing her, it was as if he had seen some fresh food. It opened its bloody mouth wide and wanted to swallow her whole. She had no time to care about it and was about to dodge. Then, he heard the sound of splashing water. It was unknown whose martial qi was so strong that it had a concrete shape. It was like a tall mirror wall that slapped the giant python onto the surface of the river. After a burst of silver light, the giant python that had been baring its fangs and brandishing its claws suddenly lost all of its hostility. Like a stray dog, it only had the remnants of its breath left. Its mouth moved as if it was calling someone. However, it didn't get a response. Hellion Vivian was stunned. Before she could figure out what had happened, she saw a man holding the wings of death with one hand. He was dressed in a noble robe and his waist-length hair was like splashed ink in the night. Green Dragon Lake was covered in a rain of blood. After the silver light, she couldn't see Beligaju's actions clearly. The giant python's mournful wail reached the sky. In the blink of an eye, the giant python fell from the surface of the lake to the ground, shaking the White Academy for a while. Separated by clouds and mist, the students of the White Academy didn't know what had happened. Beligaju sheathed his sword. There wasn't a single drop of blood on his body. He just looked down at Hellion Vivian with an indifferent expression. They had never seen such an arrogant person who saved people. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her understanding of His Highness rose to another level. The appearance of the blood snake made the students, who didn't know anything, suck in a breath of cold air. How could such an evil creature appear in the academy? Who was the one who summoned it? What method did they use? The teacher looked at the giant snake head with lingering fear. Layers of cold sweat overflowed from his forehead. If it hadn't been killed by someone, who knew how many students it would have swallowed in one breath if it had continued to stir up trouble. Furthermore, its body was highly poisonous, and its favorite food was human blood. Such a ferocious beast wouldn't be allowed to appear outside of the forest of fantasy. Where exactly did this go wrong? The teacher raised his head with trembling fingers and looked up again. He saw that the green dragon was drowsy and seemed to be asleep. Even its eyes were half closed. He thought that the dragon god was so angry that it couldn't vent its anger even if it swallowed people. He didn't want to go back. He would live in the White Academy in the future. He suddenly felt stifled. However, he didn't know that the green dragon was cooperating with Hellion Vivian. It let itself fall into a state of light sleep first. Otherwise, when the mysterious ice lock was unlocked, it would definitely touch the dragon scales. If it was awake, the dragon scales would turn into fire and hurt Hellion Vivian. At this moment, Yunbiluo pressed on her left shoulder and took a step back. No one saw that when the giant snake fell, she spat out a mouthful of black blood. She leaned against the tree trunk as if she couldn't hold on any longer. Her eyes were shining as she looked into the depths of the clouds. No one knew what was happening under the layers of fog. Little Bald Head stood up and pondered for a while. He looked majestic and asked the evil beast with him, was it third brother who did that? Master, it was the royal family. The little one who was only a little bigger than Little Bald Head came over and answered the question seriously. Then, he disappeared in front of everyone. The little seventh prince calmly said, then there's nothing to worry about. Third brother must be with third sister-in-law. That snake is not bad. Clean it up and roast it tonight. Yes. The little one was already familiar with his master's routine. It was just a blood snake beast. It even ate a dragon, let alone a snake. Clean it up immediately. Anyway, it didn't like snakes. It was better to have one less snake. In the chaos, Jing Wushuang stood in the middle. Dressed in green and white, he looked like a warm jade. He put his hand on his lips and coughed heavily. He was wiping something with his thumb. In the end, he just turned sideways and fixed his eyes on the green dragon. Hellion Jiaoer noticed his gaze and the jealousy in her heart grew stronger. She was just an ugly woman with dark skin. How could she make Master Wushuang value her so much? However, it didn't matter what tricks she played. Once she was swallowed by the dragon god, she would be digested in less than half an hour. She was waiting for the dragon god to spit out the little bitch's bones. Chapter 323. However, at this moment, Hellion Vivian had already found the source of the iron chain. She did not ask why Beligaju was here. She held the hair ornament in her mouth. Her long hair was dripping wet with water. The wind was blowing around the lake, bringing with it a bone-chilling chill. The mysterious ice-iron chain was especially cold to the touch. An ordinary person would have been frozen to death. Hellion Vivian's eyes were still shining. It was not because she was in good health. On the contrary, she was having her period, which made her very uncomfortable. However, she had to fulfill her promise to the Azure Dragon. Hellion Vivian looked at the iron chain left and right. There was coldness in her eyes. Woman, use your martial qi. Yuan Ming suddenly said, otherwise, you will not be able to open this mysterious ice-iron chain. Hellion Vivian nodded. Her fingers moved slightly and her long sleeves fluttered. Her voice was very penetrating. With my command, I call upon the wind and clouds of the world. Swoosh! The surrounding clouds and mist seemed to have sensed something and completely dispersed. The temperature of the mysterious ice-iron chain began to change. Hellion Vivian took advantage of this little time to move her hair ornament. Kacha, 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 kacha. Then, there was a clatter. The iron chain was opened. It fell heavily into the green dragon lake, along with the blood from Hellion Vivian's cut finger. With a ticking sound, the entire green dragon lake was shaken. Thump, thump. Faintly, it sounded like someone's heartbeat was revived. The entire White Academy's students did not know what had happened. Hearing this unusual sound, they all raised their heads and looked towards the sky. They saw that the azure dragon's eyes suddenly shook. Green light filled its eyes, with a domineering aura that broke through the 9 heavens. It could create clouds and rain with a flip of its hand. At this moment, the headmaster was completely dumbfounded. He kept muttering, "This is the 4 great mythical beasts of ancient times. The azure dragon is awake. It's really awake." The little 7th prince was still holding the wooden stick in his hand. He squatted in the corner and poked the head of the blood snake. When he heard that the azure dragon had woken up, he raised his fierce little face and muttered to himself, "Now that he's awake, he can't eat anymore." "Headmaster! Headmaster, where are you? Please take this child back." The headmaster was about to cry, but the little 7th prince did not show any special expression, except for a little regret. However, in his moment of regret, he did not forget to comfort others. "Headmaster, it's all right. Even if we don't have the dragon meat, we still have the snake meat." The teacher was speechless. Who cares about that? Why was talking to the little 7th prince even more powerless than dealing with the dragon god? The little 7th prince looked at the headmaster for a while with a puzzled expression. He did not understand why his 3rd brother was still not bringing 3rd sister-in-law out. Could it be that 3rd elder brother still wanted to help him fight the dragon? Actually, it was fine if he didn't eat dragon meat. Needless to say, the little 7th prince was really thinking too much. Among so many students, only Yunbiluo's expression was not quite right. However, she could not let others notice anything wrong. Especially the left hand that she had just bitten. The headmasters were still inexperienced, so they might not be able to tell. However, if Tu Su Feng came, he would know that the appearance of the blood demon snake here was very strange. In fact, she could not rely on her ability to make the blood demon snake work for her. Most importantly, there was another person here. Yunbiluo lowered her eyes. When she raised her head again, she saw the azure dragon in the clouds, which was no longer bound by the mysterious ice iron chain. The dragon swayed its tail, stirring up countless splashes of water. Yunbiluo's eyes flashed. She pounced straight at the little one, then turned around and brought him to a corner at the side. The little 7th prince looked at her fiercely. Yunbiluo had never seen such a difficult child. However, she had expected that since he was the prince's younger brother, he would definitely be smarter than the usual children. She leaned on the side weakly and asked the little one with a faint smile, "Are you hurt anywhere?" The little 7th prince could not understand why this woman suddenly rushed over when he was thinking about the problem. However, in the next moment, he understood. It was because the tall and slender figure standing not far away was none other than his 3rd brother. Yunbiluo naturally saw Beligaju. She tilted her head, her eyes were red, as if she had a lot to say. She quietly stared at the man who was slowly walking towards them. Hellion Vivian also fell to the ground at this moment. Her lower abdomen was in great pain, so she let the azure dragon enjoy the long-awaited freedom. In the chaos, no one could see clearly who was who. However, Hellion Vivian knew that the two of them were probably going against each other this time. "Your Highness." Yunbiluo was the first to speak. She stood up, but her body was a little shaky, as if she had exhausted a lot of energy to save the little 7th prince. The little 7th prince looked very innocent, but his thick tiger-like eyebrows were still furrowed. Beligaju did not speak, but his eyes fell on Yunbiluo. Hellion Vivian touched her wrist that was grabbed by the dragon claw, and only then did she feel the burning sensation. She took a deep breath, and suddenly felt that the burden in her heart was lifted. Now that the main character had appeared, they were considered to be even. In the future, they would go their separate ways, and there would be no more involvement. It seemed that the things that she had prepared were a little redundant. However, that was not necessarily the case. If Beligaju insisted on keeping her here, and let her be Yunbiluo's shield, she still had room to maneuver. No matter when or where, Hellion Vivian was able to keep calm and analyze the pros and cons in the shortest time possible. However, Bailey Jiaju's pair of black eyes were deep and gloomy, making people somewhat unfathomable. Hellion Vivian did not pay much attention to what was happening here. This was because the azure dragon had stopped writhing. The mist dissipated. The people finally saw Hellion Vivian standing in the middle of the courtyard. How could this be? Wasn't she swallowed and chewed by the dragon god directly? Hellion Jiao froze, and stared at Hellion Vivian unwillingly. Hellion Vivian did not seem to notice her gaze, and casually covered her lower abdomen with her hand. Woman, are you feeling very uncomfortable? A contractual spiritual beast and its master were one. Little White knew Hellion Vivian's body better than anyone else. Hellion Vivian was indeed uncomfortable. This body had not been properly nourished, and the mysterious ice iron had taken away all the heat in her body. Now, her lower abdomen was almost suffocating to the extreme. Therefore, she did not bother with Hellion Jiao. However, Hellion Jiao was never one to give up. She reached out and held Yunbiluo, then lowered her voice and criticized, "Elder sister, if you don't have the ability, don't provoke the dragon god." Now that Sister Yun is injured while saving the 7th prince, many of us don't know what to do because of the appearance of the dragon god. Chapter 324. That's right, that's right. Now that the dragon god is out, the whole White Academy will be drowned if this continues. People were talking one after another. Yunbiluo shook her head gently, her voice was hoarse. This kind of situation is inevitable, as long as there are no casualties. In the end, she still believed that Hellion Vivian was unable to tame the dragon god. This was because Yunbiluo did not know that Hellion Vivian had already unlocked the mysterious ice iron chain, otherwise, why would the green dragon not submit to her? Therefore, Yunbiluo's first reaction was that Hellion Vivian was interrupted by the blood serpent demon when she was unlocking the chains, resulting in the current situation. The Hellion Jiao stood beside Yunbiluo and asked, "What about Sister Yun's injury?" Yunbiluo lowered her eyes and looked at the little one tenderly. She shook her head gently, as if she was saying that as long as the 7th prince was fine, she would do anything. In comparison, the Hellion Vivian who got into trouble was superfluous. This made the little bald head very upset. He didn't say another word and ferociously kicked Hellion Jiao air. The strength of that kick was extremely strong. It made the Hellion Jiao kneel on the ground in an instant. "Who do you think you are? How dare you talk bad about my 3rd sister-in-law?" Everyone in the White Academy knew that although their little senior brother looked cute usually, he was very fierce. Once he was angry, he would talk with his fists, there was no room for discussion. Hellion Jiao was kicked into a daze. Following that, a pair of beautiful eyes brimmed with tears. That appearance appeared to be extremely aggrieved. "7th Prince, did you misunderstand what I just said?" What misunderstanding?" The little one sneered. At such a young age, he had a presence that was hard to ignore. "The one who saved me was 3rd sister-in-law. When the dragon came out just now, none of you dared to come over. If it wasn't for 3rd sister-in-law, I would have been killed by its claws. What does it have to do with this woman?" As he spoke, the little one pointed at Yunbiluo. Yunbiluo was extremely tired, as if she was thinking for the little one. I'm just worried that Miss Weiwei won't be able to control the green dragon and will hurt the seventh prince. Unable to control it. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. She covered her lower abdomen with one hand and slowly opened her other hand, as if she was preparing something. Her thin lips slightly opened, bringing out a burst of evil charm. Azure Dragon, come back. It was just a few words, but it made Yunbiluo's face lose all color. That was because the Azure Dragon flying above the clouds had landed behind Hellion Vivian at a speed visible to the naked eye. That arrogant and cold expression made everyone open their mouths wide in disbelief. God, the Dragon God really listened to Hellion Vivian. The teacher could not be any more foolish. He had heard countless versions of the legend of the Dragon God when he was still a student in the academy. Later on, he became a teacher in the academy and had a thorough understanding of the Dragon God. It would never submit to humans. Even the eminent monks who came looking for it could not subdue it. But today, it actually listened to the command of a little girl. The teacher hurriedly pushed up the glasses hanging on his face, wanting to take a closer look. Hellion Weiwei stood calmly in front of the green dragon. Her green robe fluttered in the wind. Behind her, the clouds rose endlessly, faintly discernible. From that moment on, no one dared to laugh at her. Summoning the Dragon God. Such a shocking move was something that would not happen even once in 1,000 years. Hellion Vivian, how did this person do it? She broke through their understanding again and again. Genius. She was a real genius, wasn't she? The students from the fine compound and the inferior compound were all amazed. Those from the superior compound were always unconvinced. At this moment, they could not wait to find a hole to bury themselves in. Originally, they thought that with Yunbiluo's participation, Hellion Vivian would definitely be defeated. This was because they were unhappy with the person who became the princess consort in the end. She was someone who did not have the looks and talent. Moreover, Yunbiluo was indeed very powerful. Not only because of her background, but also because of her own ability. She was better than Hellion Vivian in every aspect. However, they did not expect Hellion Vivian to be able to summon and tame the Dragon God. Such an outcome was like a direct slap to their faces. Weiwei raised her eyes and slowly swept her gaze over those few aristocratic young ladies who liked to form cliques and cliques. In the end, her gaze fell on Hellion Jiao Air's body. She lifted her foot and stepped on her hand. The evil aura at the corners of her mouth was still as before. Younger sister, do you have anything else to say? You. Hellion Jiao Air was in so much pain that she wrinkled her eyebrows. She had never been in such a difficult situation before. Hellion Weiwei looked at her calmly and said in an indifferent tone, "A concubine's daughter without any title dares to speak disrespectfully to the princess consort. Younger sister, who gave you the courage to do so?" With this sentence, the ladies from the aristocratic families who wanted to speak up for Hellion Jiao shut their mouths abruptly. They did not expect that one day, they would be suppressed by someone using their status. However, as long as Hellion Vivian said this, they could forget about moving. If they moved, they would be openly challenging the emperor's authority. The few of them glanced at each other, and all of them shrank back. However, Weiwei didn't intend to let them off. The light in her eyes turned cold, her smile contained a murderous aura. "And you guys, who gave you the guts to ignore the academy's rules and bully whoever you want? What I hate the most is school violence. Several people ganging up to bully one person, you guys are really shameless. Hellion Vivian, you." Before that person could finish speaking. Then, Hellion Weiwei gave him a tight slap. That person was not convinced and wanted to speak again. The azure dragon narrowed her eyes with an ominous glint. It made the ladies from the aristocratic families, who were used to running amok, completely weak in the legs. Good hit. There were already people from the good compound who were cheering. White Academy said that it was fair. However, there was no such thing as absolute fairness. Although this place was better than the capital. However, they did not dare to provoke those from the superior compound. Under normal circumstances, they would try their best to listen to them. However, as long as those people did not see eye to eye, they would immediately isolate that person. They even secretly pushed the students from other academies here and there, just because they thought that the other party was not obedient enough. Under such circumstances, the teachers should have stopped them. After all, those who were beaten were from powerful families and could not be provoked. However, when these students cheered, he did not know how to deal with them. Yun Biluo looked at this scene and felt that her face was slapped. Full of grievances, she bit her thin lips and looked at Beligaju. Chapter 325. Hellion Vivian naturally knew what Yun Biluo wanted to do. She just wanted Bailey Jiaju to make the decision for her. Hellion Vivian smiled gently. Today, no matter who it was, as long as they spoke up for this group of people, even if it was Beligaju, she would still fight back. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian raised her head and met Beligaju's indifferent gaze. Her heart tightened a little, but she was smiling. Especially at times like this, she could not back down. When Hellion Vivian was very young, she did a good deed. She picked up a phone and returned it, but she was locked up in the police station in Chinatown as a thief. She was later released. However, the mistress that her father married kept harping on this matter and refused to let it go. She would bring this matter up from time to time, saying that she just wanted to steal. Hellion Vivian tolerated it at that time. She would never forget what kind of feeling it was. Her heart was so empty that it was terrifying. She was injured but still punished. Because at that time, she was so insignificant that she had no right to speak. Now, she had worked so hard for so long, just so that she could one day fight against these forces. Third Prince. Let's see if he dares to speak up for Yun Biluo. She would fight with him directly, even if he had fired Qilin behind him and was once her desk mate. No one could bully her. Hellion Wei watched as Bailey Jiaju walked towards her. Her fingers clenched tightly as the corners of her mouth curved into a smile. Her whole body began to emit martial qi, but when she saw the wound on his arm, the sharpness gradually faded. Beligaju also seemed to be angry. The coldness surging from his eyes was thicker than ever. He must have seen his sweetheart being bullied and felt indignant. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and smiled, but her expression was calmer than ever. Her thoughts were also very clear. She thought for a while and decided that it was better not to fight. Her chances of winning were too slim. Because he was still holding the wings of the night god that she gave him. Of all the things she had made, the wings of the night god was the one with the least flaws and the strongest attack power. If one day Hellion Vivian knew that she had to make an enemy out of this man, she should have given Yuan Ming to him, and then turned him gay. Hellion Vivian felt a bit of heartache for her martial arts. However, to be honest, Beligaju treated her differently. When she entered the academy, everyone looked down on her. Only the armaments that he thought she could make could be used. He was a little like young Master Tang back then. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything, but she still felt grateful. Plus, he had saved her so many times, just directly terminate the contract. After Hellion Vivian made up her mind, she spoke in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Last time, I said that since someone is back, I can give up my position. Back then, we agreed to advance and retreat together. But now, it seems that won't be possible. Since that's the case, why don't we part on good terms? Beligaju's footsteps suddenly stopped. He smiled coldly. Part on good terms. Helly and Vivian made a sound of agreement. Suddenly, a loud noise came from underground. Helly and Vivian thought that something else would come out. Looking carefully, she found that the loud noise came from the man in front of her. The ground cracked open from under his feet, and the crack was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. And he just stood there with a smile that wasn't a smile. One hand was in his pocket, and the other was hanging by his side. Apart from the curve of his thin lips, even his eyes couldn't be seen. Everything was covered by his black hair. His smile was very light and very elegant. It seemed to match his usual indifferent attitude. It was just that the fingers hidden under the black gloves were a little white. The surrounding black fog suddenly thickened by a layer. A loud crash sounded. Countless bats flew up from the dense forest. It was like a sign of zombies coming back to life. It was a little scary. Helly and Vivian only heard the wind whistling in her ears. The surrounding trees swayed crazily, and even the ground seemed to be shaking. Beligaju didn't seem to notice this. His Adam's apple moved back and forth twice. He was so cold and distant that almost no one dared to approach him. In this world, there were very few people or things that could cause his emotions to fluctuate. But today, she made him a little angry. He had always tolerated her. He had raised so many prey, but he had never been so patient with any prey. But she had always wanted to leave. If it was in the past, such prey would definitely be abandoned by him. But, damn it, his heart actually softened. How ridiculous, Beligaju curved his thin lips. No, he wasn't soft-hearted. How could he be soft-hearted? But why did his chest feel so empty? It was like there was a hole that couldn't be found. He hadn't hunted for so long that he even forgot the rules of hunting. How could a hunter be controlled by a prey? Ha! Beligaju laughed in a low voice. A demonic red light appeared in his eyes. A cool breeze blew quietly. He was still standing at the same spot. His posture was elegant, his back was straight, and his head was never lowered. His fingers with black gloves moved slightly. Violent winds and torrential rain swept over. Gradually, the wetness stained his body. Yunbiluo saw this and paused. She took the umbrella from the maid and wanted to go over. Before she could get close to Beligaju, she was pinned to the spot by the man's cold gaze. That gaze was very similar to the time when he massacred the palace. Yunbiluo's heart trembled. She bit her thin lips hard, as if she had made up her mind. She called out softly, "Your Highness." Except for Helly and Vivian, no one heard what Yunbiluo said. After all, the wind and rain were too loud, which blocked the hearing. Moreover, Yunbiluo's voice was soft. She lowered her eyes and said in a low voice, "I know you still blame me for what happened back then." Miss Weiwei, as she spoke, Yunbiluo glanced at Helly and Vivian. She wanted to say something but stopped. Helly and Vivian looked indifferent. Especially when her lower abdomen was still hurting, she wanted to solve the matter quickly. Therefore, she didn't want to pay attention to Yunbiluo's usual tricks. No matter what she said, she would let Beligaju handle it. Yunbiluo didn't expect Helly and Vivian to be so calm. But it didn't matter. What she wanted to do was to explain what happened back then and get His Highness forgiveness. Thinking of this, Yunbiluo took another step forward. However, before she could speak, she was smashed to the ground by a cold word. He said, "Get lost." Who was he talking about? Helly and Vivian. The corners of Yunbiluo's lips curled up. Sure enough, no matter when, she treated him differently. Chapter 326. Hellion Vivian's indifferent lips curved into an arc. She wanted to leave but found that her body seemed to be fixed in place. She could only look at the man beside her in confusion. What was the meaning of this? Didn't he ask her to get lost? Yun Biluo, on the other hand, was full of smiles. Her beautiful eyes were filled with unconcealable pride. Hellion Vivian looked at her indifferently with obvious sarcasm in her eyes. Why was she so happy? Yun Biluo was stunned by her gaze. She shifted her gaze and looked at Beligaju. She smiled faintly, looking intoxicated and gentle. However, Beligaju frowned slightly. His deep and sharp eyes glanced at Yun Biluo in front of him. He thought for a while and opened his mouth again. His voice was deep and very pleasant, Miss Yun. His tone was very indifferent, but it faintly revealed an aura that made people feel treacherous. Miss Yun. Yun Biluo was stunned by this title. However, she immediately thought that His Highness probably did not want to reveal his identity. That was why he called her that. Her smile deepened. The one who said to get lost is you. It was just a few short words. His voice wasn't loud, but everyone heard it clearly in an instant. Yun Biluo was stunned. She only felt that her brain was buzzing and she had a terrible headache. There was no emotion in that voice, as if she was just an insignificant stranger. After a while, Yun Biluo came back to her senses. She glanced at Beligaju subconsciously. However, Beligaju just stood there with an indifferent expression. Hellion Vivian, who was beside him, did not react in time. Yun Biluo clenched her hands awkwardly. Her clear and beautiful face was unnatural. Her sparkling beautiful eyes were filled with forbearance. She tried her best to squeeze out a smile on her stiff face. Her eyes were a little red and wet. I know it's my fault, Yun Biluo obviously had something to say. However, the people beside them did not know what they were talking about. Coincidentally, after Hellion Jiao Air saw the man appear by Wei Wei's side, a scheme emerged in her mind. At this time, she couldn't bear it anymore and opened her mouth in a loud voice. Eldest sister, you keep saying that you're the princess consort to suppress us, yet you use the title of princess consort to be so intimate with another man. Eldest sister, aren't you afraid that others will say you're not chaste and unclean? When Yun Biluo heard this, she could not wait to turn around and slap Hellion Jiao. Did she know what she was doing? She was simply ruining her plan. However, Hellion Wei Wei did not give her the chance. She glanced at Bailey Jia Ju with interest and said in a light tone, Am I unchaste? Big sister, everyone in the academy knows about what happened between you and this young master. Hellion Jiao felt that if she did not show her trump card, she would completely lose the chance to defeat Hellion Vivian. She decided to be ruthless. This young master's money was given by you, right? You two are not related to each other, why are you so nice to him? She would like to see what this bitch could say this time. Hellion Jiao's purpose was obvious. A few ladies who were bullied by the side laughed. Princess Consort, you're really unworthy of the title of Princess Consort. A good academy has been messed up by some people. They don't even know how to behave in their private lives. I wonder how they passed the selection. That's why I say it's a good trick. Hellion Vivian crossed her arms in front of her chest. She glanced at them indifferently and did not speak. Big sister, I want to believe you. Hellion Jiao Air spoke very affectionately and earnestly. But the things you've done, everyone has seen it. His Highness doesn't know. If he knew, have you ever thought about the consequences? Little seventh prince furrowed his thick eyebrows. He looked at his third brother's indifferent face and then looked at the non-stop Hellion Jiao. Only a few words appeared in his mind. This woman is dead for sure. As expected, Beligaju slowly opened his mouth. His low and deep voice was very magnetic. I don't know what the consequences will be. A face as handsome as a god paired with a devilish smile was reflected in Hellion Jiao Air's eyes. Even Hellion Jiao Air couldn't help but become absent-minded. This young master, I understand your difficulties. If you really lack money, my defense division will also help you. But you need to know that the one you're on good terms with is a married woman. Oh. Bailey Jia Ju's smiling yet not smiling face carried an extremely unfathomable mystery. So it turns out that the young ladies of the defense division's large families have always used money to send people off. Faintly sensing that something wasn't quite right, Hellion Jiao Air's tone of voice also followed suit and restrained itself. I'm only afraid that you'll be led astray. If young master thinks this way, then there's absolutely no need to continue discussing. I only hope that young master won't regret the words he said now. After all, our defense division also has dignity. Using your status to suppress me. Beligaju's thin lips curled up. Then, he glanced at the little person not far away. The little person walked over with the snake's head. Then, he raised his head. Third brother. His voice was a little soft. But it was like a thunderbolt that rang in the Hellion Jiao's head. Her face turned pale in an instant. As little seventh prince called out, third brother. All the students in the courtyard seemed to have their throats pinched by someone's hand. They looked at Beligaju in disbelief. Even the headmaster trembled in fear when he heard the title. A student from the inferior compound. An outsider who couldn't even afford the tuition fees. He was actually the famous third prince, the world's #1 prince. What was going on? The teacher felt a little dizzy. Some of the students felt as if their blood was boiling. Especially the students from the inferior compound, they were even more excited. No wonder their Prince Charming was so powerful. No wonder he didn't like to make friends and shocked the whole White Academy when he made a move. It turned out that their Prince Charming was not someone else, but the third prince whom they had worshipped for a long time. The group of students from the superior compound were dumbfounded. Thinking of how they had repeatedly wanted to teach him a lesson, they were so scared that they broke out in cold sweat. They even wrote him a challenge letter. Fortunately, this person had never put them in his eyes. So he didn't even bother to read their challenge letter. Or else, the more the students from the superior compound thought, the paler their faces became. Especially those young ladies, they were all in a mess. Almost all of them had laughed at the man's background because they were jealous that he was always with Hellion Vivian. He didn't even pay attention to them. But now, they only wanted to give themselves 2 slaps. Hellion Jiao was anxious and wanted to explain. Her white and beautiful face showed urgency. Third. Royal, I just. Chapter 327. You want to use your identity to oppress me, I heard it very clearly. Beligaju's cold tone carried an irresistible aura. Besides, who are you calling unchaste? When the man said this, he raised his long and narrow eyes with a chill. This made Hellion Jiao Air's entire body stiffen. She had never seen Third Prince's appearance after he grew up. When she was in the palace, she only saw his back and was doomed eternally. Now, she finally saw his real face. Hellion Jiao did not even dare to look at him. She kept glancing at Yun Biluo who was standing beside her, hoping that she would plead for her. Mother said that if it was Yun Biluo who said it, the royal would definitely listen. Hellion Jiao, who thought that she held the death exemption card, did not know that Beligaju had just asked Yun Biluo to get lost. Murong Changfeng, who came from afar, saw this scene and the corner of his mouth faintly curled up. Although this sudden revelation of his identity caught him off guard, he was still a little unprepared. But this way, it was not completely without benefits. Father arranged for Yunbiluo to enter the White Academy so that she could meet Beligaju earlier. He thought that if he sent the news to the palace, the retired emperor might find out soon. Now, he did not have to worry. Who would have thought that Beligaju was in the White Academy? This was for the best. It could also make Hellion Wei realize that to that man, she was just a chess piece that could be thrown away at any time. I'm asking you a question, why do you keep looking at others? Beligaju's voice sounded again. Hellion Jiao braced herself and said, I didn't understand the situation and misunderstood Big Sister. I just thought that Your Highness and Sister Yun must have something to talk about after not seeing each other for so many years. Didn't Big Sister tell Your Highness about Sister Yun's return? Big Sister has seen Sister Yun several times. Hellion Jiao thought that if she changed the topic, she would be able to escape this disaster. Beligaju did not let her down. He glanced at the shadow guard with a faint smile. For some reason, the shadow guard felt a chill down his spine when he saw that glance. Beligaju seemed to be absent-minded as he asked Hellion Vivian, have you met before? Yes. Hellion Vivian felt that there was no need to hide this, but she could not figure out what Beligaju was thinking. Hellion Jiao looked at this scene, the light in her eyes turned slightly, and she added, it's probably because eldest sister felt that if His Highness knew that Sister Yun had returned, he would be distracted, so she didn't tell His Highness. Otherwise, she wouldn't have competed with Sister Yun in the tea house last time. Beligaju turned his face and revealed an evil smile, you even competed with her. It seems like she came to the White Academy a long time ago. Sister Yun did come a long time ago. Hellion Jiao felt that the earlier she said it, the more scheming Hellion Vivian seemed. Yunbiluo listened to their conversation and was more certain that His Highness asked her to leave because he was still brooding over the past. In fact, he was very concerned about when she came back. Otherwise, he would not have said so much to Hellion Jiao. Yunbiluo could not help but feel wronged when she thought about what happened just now. She looked at Beligaju with tears in her eyes. Everyone said that the royal family was the most patient with Yunbiluo, especially when she cried. However, no one had verified it. In fact, Beligaju's eyes were gradually showing a thin layer of hostility. His slender fingers played with the pinky ring on his palm and he said in a low voice, no one informed me that you've been here for so long, I missed the opportunity to listen to your song. Yunbiluo heard this and her face softened. She smiled through her tears, now that I'm back, I can play it for you anytime. Really? Beligaju looked up and smiled suddenly. He was indescribably cold, if that's the case, then play it now. Both of you play it together. If you play it well and the princess likes it, I can pretend that nothing happened today. What? Hellion Jiao did not expect Beligaju to say that. The smile on her face froze again. Yunbiluo's face was completely drained of blood. Your Highness. Hellion Jiao seemed to want to say something. What's wrong? Beligaju walked over and looked at her coldly, you don't agree? Then I'll add 1,000,000 taels of gold, as long as the princess is satisfied. He still had that unique smile on his face. It was so cold that it made one's scalp numb. There was a commotion among the students. They looked at Hellion Jiao and Yunbiluo as if they were looking at performers in the dark alleys. That was exactly what the third prince was trying to say. Yunbiluo's fingers that were holding the handkerchief tightened silently. Her pale face seemed to have exhausted all her strength. She looked at Beligaju pitifully and murmured, I know your highness won't forgive me so easily, but, it seems that you didn't hear my words clearly. Beligaju's tone was indifferent and even a little ruthless, are you going to play or not? Upon hearing that, Yunbiluo's face turned even paler. Others might not know about Beligaju's tricks, but she had been by his side for so many years. How could she not know that he had 100 ways to make people wish they were dead? No matter how holy and noble he looked on the surface, he was colder than anyone else in his bones. Since you don't want to play, then forget it. Bailey Jiaju's voice was neither fast nor slow, but also seemed to carry a smile. The defense division's marriage should also be arranged. As for the other people, who said anything bad about the princess consort, properly slapped their own mouths. As he spoke, he unbuttoned his collar with an evil smile. There was a murderous intent at the corner of his eyes. He tilted his body slightly. Or would you prefer me to do it myself? Who dared to ask the third prince to do it himself? Just this one sentence was enough to make everyone's face turn pale. Those ladies from aristocratic families did not dare to do it anymore. They could only reach out their hands and slap their faces. Because they knew very well that if they did not do as they were told, it was very likely that she would end up in the same state as Hellion Jiao Air. Marrying a eunuch, that was simply more painful than death. Wasn't it said that the royal family was marrying Hellion Vivian just to appease the retired emperor? But now it seemed that, how could there be such a reason? They only felt that they had been cheated. They regretted it so much that their intestines turned green. However, there was no medicine for regret in this world. So they could only clench their teeth and slap their own mouths. Your Highness, listen to me. Hellion Jiao was even more flustered. She wanted to grab Beligaju's sleeve. However, Bailey Jiaju did not even look at her. He turned to the little seventh prince and instructed, send her back to the general's residence. Just say that I said so. The general's residence has delayed the wedding. Are they trying to defy the imperial edict? Chapter 328. Upon hearing that, Hellion Jiao was completely paralyzed on the ground. She had never thought that it would end up like this. Her mother's guesses were all wrong. His Highness would not be influenced by anyone. Even if Yun Biluo was here, it would still be the same. Murong Changfeng could not react in time as well. It was as if he could see their long-term plan collapsing all of a sudden. Both his father and his aunt had underestimated Beligaju. Yun Biluo had no choice but to bite her thin lips and look at Shadow, who was standing aside. Shadow did not dare to speak at this time. But even if he did not speak, Beligaju did not intend to let him go easily. He reached out his hand and patted his face gently. His devilish face was extremely handsome. Shadow, how many years have you been with me? I gave you the task and you fooled me like this. What did I say? You have to tell me immediately if anyone goes to the princess. Why is it an exception this time? It seems that I did not use the right means. Upon hearing that, Shadow's face turned extremely pale. Your Highness, please listen to me. I didn't know that Miss Yun went to the princess, then what do you know? All of a sudden, Bailey Jiaju grabbed his throat. That kind of strength and coldness shocked all the shadow guards. Shadow was in great pain, but he knew that this time he thought too highly of himself. Your Highness, it's my fault. Shadow. Bailey Jiaju retracted his hand and said in an indifferent tone, I'll give you one last chance to settle this matter properly. Otherwise, everyone will stay underground and never come out again in this lifetime. As soon as the words left his mouth, not only the shadow guards, but also the faces of those death attendants changed. One after another, they lowered their heads and no longer dared to show any disrespect to Wei Wei. However, at this time, Yun Biluo saw Beligaju walking past her indifferently and suddenly panicked. Your Highness, if you don't want me to disturb Miss Wei Wei, I won't bother her in the future. If I knew that knowing her would make you so unhappy, I would never do it. As Yun Biluo spoke, she reached out and grabbed Bailey Jiaju's sleeves in a panic. Her beautiful eyes could not help but sparkle, revealing a touch of vulnerability and grievance that could not be concealed. Beligaju stopped and looked up at her. He said indifferently, then disappear completely. Don't play tricks in front of me. Upon hearing this, Yunbiluo's face turned even paler. Although she spoke in such a light tone, she could not withstand the icy glare he gave her. She explained in a daze, I just want to see. However, Bailey Jiaju didn't have the intention to talk to her again. His tall and handsome body directly walked past her. Yunbiluo's aggrieved and choked voice was heard. Her pale and fragile face made one feel pity for her. Hellion Vivian could not move, but she could still hear. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Beligaju, who was walking toward her. She did not say much because her lower abdomen was hurting too much. It was so painful that she only had one question from the beginning. Was the royal family doing this to help prevent her anger? It should be. However, it was the first time she heard him say so much. Her words were even more hurtful than her actions. At least she did not have the ability to make people cry. But wasn't Yunbiluo the person he loved the most? Hatred born from love. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows again. Shadow. Beligaju walked to Hellion Vivian. He looked at her but ordered the people around him, take care of the aftermath. I have something to discuss with the princess. Hellion Vivian was speechless. Discuss what? You had the guts to part peacefully with me, but now you don't have the guts to look at me. The man's voice rang in her ears. Hellion Vivian thought that she could not move because she was immobilized by the body-fixing spell. Chapter 329. Hellion Vivian glanced at her left hand that was held by him. If my reason is good, will you unlock it? You really have the idea of leaving me. Bailey Jiaju's slightly narrowed eyes suddenly sank, the depths of his eyes congealed with deepness, looking at him made Wei Wei feel somewhat faintly uneasy. She couldn't help but look away. Look at me, tell me, what are you thinking? There was a hint of suppressed displeasure in his low voice, and the big hand around her waist tightened. That kind of strength made Hellion Vivian feel a slight pain in her waist. She could not help but frown, but her tone was indifferent. I do have such thoughts. I don't know if you signed the contract purely to appease the retired emperor or to push me out to be Yunbiluo's shield. If it's the former, I can understand. But if it's the latter, I have to consider my own future and give myself a way out. You're not a shield. Beligaju lowered his head and looked into her dark eyes. There were some complicated emotions, but he did not hide it. You're a prey that I'm very interested in. Hellion Vivian rubbed her lower abdomen with a headache. Yes, I know. He locked her up for no reason. If she was not a prey, then what was she? Moreover, from the way he treated her from the beginning, it was obvious that he was hunting, and he would use any means necessary. Does my prey need to be someone's shield? Beligaju's voice was very slow. That kind of noble demeanor made Hellion Vivian speechless. However, at that moment, Hellion Vivian caught some information. Her eyes were fixed on Beligaju. Your Highness, how many prey have you had? 2. Beligaju felt that she was simply changing the topic. When he answered, his long eyebrows were knitted together. Hellion Vivian's dark eyes were complicated. One is me. The other is Fire Qilin. Yes. Beligaju raised his thin lips with a faint smile. Do you want me to punish you immediately by talking about this? Hellion Vivian continued to look at him. Until Beligaju pursed his thin lips into a straight line. She asked again, what about Yunbiluo? Why don't you treat her as your prey? Do you think anyone can be this lord's prey? Beligaju was very unhappy that she kept talking about this kind of unimportant issue. Even his tone was a little cold. After Hellion Wei Wei heard the other party's words, she was suddenly somewhat stunned. She thought of many scenarios. But he didn't expect it to be this kind of person. Apart from the fire Cheelin, there was only her. Beligaju, have you never liked anyone before? Hellion Vivian dragged her tired body and asked another question. Beligaju opened his mouth with a hint of mockery. Like? No. No wonder your EQ is so low. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh. She always felt that she had vaguely touched on some unknown secret. It was very possible. His Highness treated her a little differently. Although it was narcissistic to think so. But, she could only understand it this way. Hellion Vivian had been involved in a case before. The serial killer had such a mentality. He would treat whoever he liked as his prey. Of course, she didn't mean that Beligaju had the tendency to be a serial killer. No, thinking about it carefully, he did have it. In short, Hellion Vivian didn't know why her face suddenly felt a little hot. She cleared her throat and said, others said that you treated Yunbiluo differently since you were young. Why didn't you just treat her as your prey? She was a maid left by my mother. After saying a few words, Beligaju said casually, and I didn't like to keep prey when I was young. I only liked to kill. Hellion Vivian. Your Highness, how did you grow up? When Bailey Jiaju saw that Hellion Wei Wei did not speak, he thought that she was being disdainful of his actions. His smile became even colder. What's the matter? Are you uncomfortable after hearing all this? No. After Hellion Wei Wei answered Bailey Jiaju's question, she instinctively thought of young Master Tang. No one would be willing to learn how to kill at a young age, unless it was absolutely necessary. After thinking for a while, she added, I know what kind of place the palace is. You're just trying to protect yourself. Beligaju was stunned. Not because of anything else, but because the woman patted his head while talking. So, he thought that the prey was so interesting. So interesting that he didn't want to let go. Hellion Vivian also felt that her way of comforting people was too cool and not suitable for His Highness. But anyway, she had already moved, so she couldn't take back her hand. It was just that her stomach was too painful, and her face was a little pale. Actually, I'm a little uncomfortable. Where do you feel uncomfortable? Bailey Jiaju moved his fingers. Hellion Vivian directly stopped him. You don't have to unlock me, but I have to say that my robe is stained by my period. Even if he didn't understand the suffering of the world, Beligaju still knew what period was. He frowned and stood up from the soft couch. Hellion Vivian didn't know where he went, but he didn't unlock her robe before he left. She was too lazy to torment him. Especially after she guessed Beligaju's thoughts. She always felt that tormenting him would be a waste of her physical strength. Although she wanted to tell Beligaju that she was a person, a different kind of existence from the fire Cheelin. But even if she said it, His Highness wouldn't understand. It was more practical to sleep. Hellion Vivian turned sideways and pressed her lower abdomen with both hands. She was not very comfortable. Cold sweat overflowed from her forehead, making her feel like she was floating. She knew that Qing Zhan came in to change her robe. After that, she heard the noise outside from time to time. She always wanted to ask them to be quiet, but she was too lazy to speak. Let them do whatever they want. Of course, Beligaju wouldn't do it casually. He directly called the imperial physician from the palace. The imperial physician had been practicing medicine for many years, but it was the first time he was called in because of this. He was too embarrassed to check Hellion Vivian's pulse. He only said to Beligaju timidly, Your Highness, when a woman is having her period, she will feel uncomfortable when she is exposed to cold air. She's in pain. Beligaju coldly interrupted the imperial physician. The imperial physician's scalp was numb from his long and narrow eyes. He reached out and wiped his forehead. This will indeed cause a woman to suffer more. Is there any way to solve this? Belligaju's long eyebrows were tighter, bringing out a strong sense of oppression. The imperial physician thought for a while, boil some ginger sugar water for this lady. Maybe she will feel better. Maybe. It was obvious that Belligaju was not satisfied with such an answer. Give her some prescription that will cure her immediately. Prescription that will cure her immediately. The imperial physician was in a dilemma. Your Highness, there is really no way to cure this kind of pain. There was no record of any medicine that could cure menstrual cramps immediately. Chapter 330. Belligaju looked at the imperial physician who was standing next to him without moving. In the end, he only threw 2 words at him, quack. Quack, quack. He had been practicing medicine for more than 10 years. When he was by the Emperor Emeritus' side, he had won a lot of prestige. Now, he was being called a quack because of menstrual cramps. The imperial physician felt very wronged and began to look up at the ceiling with tears streaming down his face. Belligaju lowered his eyes and no one knew what he was thinking. In the end, he frowned and began to order the imperial physician, "You, go and buy some ginger." The imperial physician exclaimed in surprise. Belligaju raised his eyebrows, "Don't you want to drink ginger sugar water?" The imperial physician was irritated by the way he looked at him as if he was looking at an idiot. Since he thought that he was a quack, why did he still use his method? Although he was shouting, the imperial physician still bought what he needed to buy. He resigned himself to his fate and boiled the sugar water. Belligaju sat next to the soft bed and seemed to have thought of something. He threw the outer garment he wore today to Aning. "Burn it." Yes. Now, Aning did not dare to ask why, even if this outer garment was newly made today and the fabric was the most expensive silk from Suzhou. Since His Highness found it dirty, he could only take it and burn it. Helene Vivian was still sleeping. Her slightly wet black hair hid her small face. She looked like a trapped little beast. Even her claws were soft. Belligaju originally thought that he would like to see her like this. After all, this was the only way she could be peaceful. Now, he felt that it was an eyesore. His fingers held her wrist and softly drooped down. For some reason, he felt that it was not pleasing to the eye. When the imperial physician arrived, he saw this scene and was hesitating whether to bring the sugar water over. Bailey Jiaju opened his mouth, his clear and cold voice carried his usual command, "Put the bowl there." Yes. The imperial physician knew that at this time, he would not be tactful if he stayed. After putting the bowl down, he lowered his head and walked out. Belligaju picked up the porcelain bowl. Without thinking, he drank a mouthful of the sweet water. Then, he leaned over and pressed his thin lips against her pale lips, passing the sweet water to her. Qin Zhan was still serving by the side. When she saw this scene, her hands and feet stiffened as she retreated. Helene Vivian was in a daze, but she felt very comfortable with the strength of the big hands on her waist. Coupled with the familiar smell of sandalwood around her, she fell into a deeper sleep. Belligaju hugged Helene Vivian in his arms. His long legs were slightly crossed, and his robe was scattered. That posture looked very handsome. "No matter what, don't even think of leaving this palace." After a long time, he finally faintly said this sentence. Suddenly, he hugged Helene way tightly and absorbed her thin body temperature. His eyes, which held power over the world, carried a rare sense of desolation. Night fell bit by bit. The wind was blowing on all sides of the mountain peak, bringing with it a bone-piercing chill. At this time, there was no sound in the surroundings of the defense general's residence. Except for Helene Zhao's defeated cry, "Mother, what should I do? This time, I have nothing. Marrying Huai and that eunuch, I'd rather die." But what could she do? It was fine if the order was given by the royal family. Since Helene Zhao came back, the Huai family blocked the entrance of the defense general's residence, saying that they wanted to marry the bride. Being forced to this point, Hellion Jiao could only marry over to shut the mouths of the people. There was no other way. Madame Su gritted her teeth. She hated Hellion Vivian to the extreme, but she could not think of anything. Hellion Guangyao looked at this pair of mother and daughter, his eyes narrowed again and again. Originally, he didn't want to get involved in this matter, but now that he didn't, his beloved daughter would really be ruined. This was not the main reason. All along, Hellion Guangyao had hoped that Hellion Jiao could marry into a good family, so he took care of her since she was young. Now, all of it was ruined. If he did not take action, that girl might really ride on his head. This was something that Hellion Guangyao could not tolerate. He pondered for a long time, and said in a heavy tone, Jiao is the reincarnation of the Phoenix girl. Whether she marries well will also affect the 4 great families. Madam, send someone to the sacrificial spiritual hall now and let the elders come forward to persuade the Huai family. As long as the Huai family takes the initiative to break off the engagement, I, Hellion Guangyao, will give them satisfactory compensation. You mean to let the Huai family break off the engagement? Madame Su was stunned, but in this way, won't our family's Jiao become a girl whose engagement is broken off? Hellion Guangyao glanced at her. This is the only thing we can do now. Breaking off the engagement is better than marrying into the Huai family. What's more, even if the engagement was broken off, there's still a dozen or so days before I can truly control the entire Hellion clan. Jiao is my, Hellion Guangyao's, daughter, and with the support of the 4 great clans, who wouldn't want to marry her in the future? Su Yan Mo thought about it and immediately called someone over, carefully exhorting a few words, then said, Old Master, I really don't understand why Wei Wei is always against our Jiao, causing her to be so terrible every time. As her mother, I feel angry and indignant in my heart, but I can't do anything to her. Old Master once said that we must keep her alive. After all, even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. But I see Wei Wei's attitude. She hates us to the extreme, and wants to make us unhappy everywhere. I heard from my brother, not only has Jiao become like this, even the Su family's business in Jiangnan has been ruined by that girl. Old Master, you can't let her go like this anymore. Yes, Father, you can't indulge her like this anymore. Hellion Jiao cried pitifully. It's not enough for her to hurt third sister, she also wants to hurt me. All day long, she thinks about how badly you treat her, but she doesn't think that if it wasn't for Father, she would have starved to death on the side of the road. In fact, I don't want to blame eldest sister for these things, but eldest sister is really too much of a bully. I know. Hellion Guangyao raised his eyes. You've said before that the girl's body was taken over by someone else. I've always kept this matter in mind. I've also contacted someone to help me investigate. There's already news from that side. She has also entered the White Academy. As for the rest, didn't that girl want to participate in the family meeting? I have long planned. It is easy to bribe a few elders, not to mention that I am the only one who may have the military seal. Even if that girl has the support of the third prince, it is useless. You just wait and see how she will be isolated from the family meeting that day, thinking that she can rely on her fists and martial qi to get the position. I won't give her the chance. Su Yan Mo heard this and laughed happily. I knew that old master has the best ideas. That little bastard wants to take back the general's residence? No way. Chapter 331. The Hellion Jiao finally stopped crying when she saw the solution. Sure enough, the 4 influential families stepped in. The Huai residents did not say anything since their son had already married a daughter-in-law from the Hellion family. Only a fool would not take the money when it was offered. They ordered the bridal escort to retreat from the defense general's residence. However, the Hellion Giaour was still unhappy. She had fallen from being the most talented girl in the capital to someone whose engagement was broken off, and her father had to give so much money to the other party. How could she take this lying down? However, mother, you have underestimated the third prince. He was not affected by Yunbiluo at all. Did we make the wrong move? Su Yan Mo patted her hand, who said that he was not affected. Think about it carefully. If there was someone around you for so many years, disappearing and coming back just like that, you would definitely be unhappy. Look at this time, the third prince obviously did not forget about Yunbiluo. Since he did not forget, there is hope for everything. The Hellion Giaour bit her lip as she listened, but mother, you don't know. The third prince always sided with that little bitch Hellion Vivian to avenge her. I am worried, Jiao. Su Yanmo's tone was indifferent. She is the third princess consort. You have not thought it through this time and challenged the third princess consort's authority in front of others. The emperor's authority is not something that can be casually said. A person like the third prince will not allow anyone to belittle his chosen princess consort. The Hellion Giaour took a deep breath unwillingly. Then mother, what do you think I should do? You don't have to go to the academy during this period of time. It's not suitable for me to attend gatherings in the capital recently. Wait until your father truly removes that little bastard from the family, then everything will be better. Su Yan Mo stroked Hellion Giaour's long hair and looked at Hellion Guangyao. Some time ago, her business was in a mess and she did not have much money on hand. However, she did not know what Hellion Guangyao was doing recently. She had a feeling that he was hiding something from her. Perhaps it was because she was too paranoid. When she went to see those madams for a few days in a row, she felt that they had something to say. That feeling of being pointed at and gossiped about really made her feel uncomfortable. He wanted to have a good talk with Hellion Guangyao, but he could not find the time. They had just finished discussing this matter. Then, someone whispered something in Hellion Guangyao's ear. Hellion Guangyao stood up and said to the Hellion Giaour and Su Yan Mo, I still have matters to attend to in the imperial court, I'll take my leave first. Su Yan Mo hurriedly escorted him out. The steward followed beside Hellion Guangyao. Seeing that they could no longer see the entrance of the general's residence, he blurted out his worries. Old master, Miss Lien Er's injury should be fine. It's better for you to accompany Madam and Miss at this time. If the Su family finds out, I'm afraid the situation will be disadvantageous to you. Hellion Guangyao thought about it for a moment, then retracted the foot that was about to step out. I'll listen to you, I'll take a stroll back to the manor. Yes. The two of them really did take a stroll. When Hellion Guangyao returned, Su Yan Mo was still awake. She was pleasantly surprised to see him and wanted to talk to him. However, Hellion Guangyao looked very tired, so Su Yan Mo could only give up. Thinking that she would be able to deal with Hellion Vivian soon, she felt a burst of joy in her heart and closed her eyes not long after. However, what she did not know was that Hellion Guangyao was not asleep. Instead, he was full of thoughts, but those thoughts were not in her heart at all. The night deepened a little. When Beligaju woke up, Hellion Vivian seemed to be much more comfortable. Her face was also rosy. He reached out his hand, intending to poke Hellion Vivian's face. He did not expect that someone would not know peace in her sleep and would grab his finger and put it in her mouth like food. Hellion Vivian's bite did not hurt. Her long eyelashes were half curved, and the tip of her small tongue slid across Beligaju's finger. Still warm, Beligaju only felt a strange sensation from his fingertips to his lower abdomen, faintly tickling. His eyes suddenly darkened, and without the slightest hesitation, he leaned over and kissed her neck. Probably because this area was more sensitive, Hellion Vivian instantly tensed up, her fingers grasping Beligaju's clothes tightly. The two of them were very close to each other. Beligaju reached out and pressed the back of her head, inserting his fingers into Hellion Vivian's hair, gently stroking it, watching the other's soft hair slide down between his fingers like flowing water. His mind was completely immersed in it. The gentle pressure on her scalp made the sleeping Hellion Wei feel exceptionally comfortable. She let out a long sigh. Her hoarse voice made the itch in the bottom of Bailey Jiaju's heart even stronger. He squinted and suddenly stood up, striding to the side of the copper basin, sprinkling cold water on his face. He looked at the unfamiliar self in the copper mirror, his long eyebrows slightly furrowed. But compared to this, he could feel his heart beating so violently, almost breaking through the thin layer of flesh on his chest. What kind of feeling was this, damn it? Beligaju glanced at his own legs, looking at the unfamiliar self in the mirror. It was obvious that he needed to calm down. Since he could not play with his prey, then he could only kill. Beligaju retracted his gaze from the copper mirror, then strolled out. The number of shadow guards was 3 times more than usual. His Highness chose to reveal his identity, which meant that the White Academy would not be peaceful in the future. After retired Emperor found out, he also couldn't do anything to him. However, he wasn't completely worried that those people from the 4 great clans would harm Bailey Jiaju. He was afraid that Bailey Jiaju would be angered and accidentally fall into the devil's path. Shadow knew the retired emperor's thoughts, so there were some things that he did not want His Highness to do personally under normal circumstances. However, he knew that His Highness was really angry today. From his reaction during the day, Shadow knew that there would be a follow-up to this matter. Call by May over. Beligaju stood under the sparse shadows of the trees, casually turning the ring on his finger. Shadow paused, and without any hesitation, he went to find Bai Mei. Beligaju sat on the rattan chair, holding his chin with one hand, casually flipping through the scroll in his hand. Do you want to know where Heizhu went? Bai Mei did not understand why His Highness suddenly mentioned Heizhu, but she felt that the atmosphere was a little wrong, and her whole body was a little cold. Beligaju turned another page of the scroll and said, "Show her the thing." Bai Mei heard this, turned around and saw Heizhu's pale face. She suddenly panicked, and with a bang, she knelt on the ground. Chapter 332. Your Highness, I. Bai Mei wanted to explain. Bailey Jiaju coldly glanced at her and said, "You good sisters have just met, why are you still so nervous?" As a death attendant, she was not afraid of death, but she was afraid of Beligaju at this moment. She was a little regretful, regretting that she acted on her own accord before. "I have overestimated your IQ." Bailey Jiaju looked at her with a slight smile, but his smile did not reach his eyes. "She is my prey. Usually, I can't bear to let her get hurt, but you guys are good, making her think about how to leave me." After hearing this, Bai Mei's breath froze, and she tried to explain, I thought Sister Yun was the one who, bang." Bai Mei did not finish her words. Beligaju waved his sleeve and threw her more than a meter away. Bai Mei coughed in pain, and blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Beligaju acted as if he did not see it, and stood up slowly. "How is the situation at the general's residence?" "Reporting to Your Highness, the people at the Huai residence have accepted the money from the 4 influential families and cancelled the marriage with Hellion Jiaoer," Shadow said as he gave a look to the people beside him. The shadow guards bowed their heads and carried the half-dead Bai Mei away. From now on, they understood the principle of seeing the Princess Consort as if she was seeing His Highness. Beligaju listened to Shadow's report and smiled evilly, cancelling the marriage. "The Huai residence dares to cancel the marriage that I granted. How dare they?" Shadow lowered his head. "Of course they have the guts. They know that Master is not to be trifled with, but they still made the decision at this time. Hand over the evidence of the Huai residence's corruption over the years to the retired emperor." Since the Huai residence does not want to hold a wedding, let them hold a funeral. Beligaju said very lightly. Shadow could imagine how miserable the Huai residence would be in the future. What about the general's residence? Let Lan Lian continue, Helian Guangyao won't be able to hold on much longer. At this point, Beligaju sneered, that woman's methods are still a little too soft. Of course, when dealing with people like Su Yan Mo, an eye for an eye. The Fire Qilin didn't want to say it, but it couldn't hold it in anymore. Master, no one in this world is more despicable than you. Really? Sending a death attendant to seduce Helian Guangyao was something only its master could think of. It was so sinister. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and glanced at it. The fire unicorn shrunk its big head in fear. What I mean is, why did you get involved in this kind of thing? It was obvious that it disdained fighting between humans the most. Beligaju put the book in his hand on the wooden table. As a qualified host, of course I have to know how to feed it. So, was it because of Helian Vivian? When I was your prey, you never fed me. The fire unicorn stretched its neck to fight for its own benefits. Bailey Jia Juve glanced at it faintly. Didn't I feed you vegetables? I'm a carnivore. The fire unicorn couldn't help but want to roar. But Beligaju was obviously tired of it and was about to cut off the stream of consciousness. The fire unicorn hurriedly stopped him. Wait. Master, I think you should tell Miss Vivian about this. Otherwise, if you do so much and she doesn't know about it, wouldn't it be a waste? Sigh, a master who has never been in love, even this kind of thing has to worry about it. In this world, there is absolutely no second mythical beast that is more versatile than him. Ow! Master, think about it, if Miss Vivian knows about this news, she will definitely be very touched. When a woman is touched, she will throw herself into your arms. The fire unicorn kept talking about its point of view. Usually, Beligaju would have shut it up by now, but today, he listened to the whole story. The fire unicorn suddenly felt that its position in its master's heart had improved a lot. It puffed up its chest and stroked its handsome fiery red fur. It couldn't be more proud. On the other hand, the little animals who were scared by the green dragon felt like crying again. They hid in the corner and didn't dare to come out, for fear of touching the fire unicorn's fur. Deep in the courtyard. The man looked at Yun Biluo in front of him. Is this the influence you mentioned? His Highness and I had some misunderstandings before. Yun Biluo thought for a while and raised her beautiful face. But I believe that these misunderstandings will be cleared up one day. I need time. The man tilted his head and thought for a while before standing up. Helian Vivian can even summon the green dragon. What do you think your chances of winning are? Yun Biluo's fingers tightened at the mention of this. There is one last test for the battle dragon army. Someone wants Helian Vivian to lose more than I do. Ha! The man chuckled. These tricks again. Alright, you can leave now. Yun Biluo retreated sideways. She controlled herself for a long time and didn't look for Beligaju. She told herself that if this was the price she had to pay for her betrayal, she would do anything as long as it could appease His Highness. However, what bothered her was that she couldn't even get in touch with Bai Mei. Yun Biluo narrowed her eyes and walked forward. The demon-transforming beast was hiding in the corner and looking at her with one of its red eyes. After Yun Biluo left, it appeared in front of the man. Master, we sacrificed the blood snake beast because of her. It's not worth it, the man's fingers paused. He didn't look happy at all. The demon-transforming beast knew that it shouldn't say this, but it said, I've never seen a human like Beligaju. But if it wasn't for the fire unicorn, he wouldn't have noticed the blood snake beast. But somehow, the fire unicorn was crazy enough to be his divine beast. It's hard for the bone-eroding beast and the rest to show themselves. I'm afraid that the fire unicorn would notice them and ruin Master's plan. Then I'll possess the human body. The man retracted his gaze. The wills of the elders of the 4 great clans are about to be worn down. After drinking the blood of the spirit beasts this time, you can control their skins as you please. You can sit in whichever position you want. As for the fire unicorn, leave it to the azure dragon. The demon-transforming beast frowned at the last sentence. That's impossible. Although the fire unicorn and the azure dragon were not on good terms before, they were both under the command of that man. They shouldn't fight. Hellion Vivian can summon the azure dragon, but she can't contract it. The man used a very indifferent voice to speak tirelessly. Once the mysterious ice iron chain is undone, it also means that the azure dragon's body no longer has any restrictions. The azure dragon's appearance depends on the chi around it. When the azure dragon was trapped at the bottom of the lake, it was only because the White Academy was full of auspicious chi that allowed it to maintain its nature. Chapter 333. What the azure dragon looks like depends on the chi around it. When the azure dragon was trapped at the bottom of the lake, it was because of the auspicious chi in the White Academy that allowed it to maintain its nature. As long as the auspicious chi in the White Academy is destroyed, the azure dragon will be demonized and be used by me. The demon-transforming beast's eyes lit up. Master has a way. I'll go and tell the bone-eroding beast now. The man nodded. The corner of his mouth slowly curved up, bringing out a never-before-seen evil aura. It's time for the world ruled by humans to come to an end, pitter-patter. The night rain droplets fell on the wide leaves. When Hellion Wei Wei woke up, she subconsciously tugged at her locked left hand. Then, she looked at the man lying next to her. Only then did she realize that her clothes had been changed. Her stomach no longer hurt, and she felt indescribably comfortable. She slept for a very long time. She licked her lips and wanted to drink water. While she was deep in thought, Bailey Jia Ju woke up. He glanced at her faintly, then took the porcelain cup and brought it to her lips. Drink. That tone was no different from keeping a pet. Hellion Vivian thought for a while. She moved her fingers and unlocked herself first. Then, she drank the cup of water under Beligaju's slightly cold gaze. After she finished drinking, she locked herself in again. She was so obedient that she couldn't be any more obedient. As expected, the royal was very satisfied with her behavior. He helped her comb her long hair with his fingers, hugged her, and closed his eyes. Hellion Vivian's current mood was really hard to describe. Unfortunately, Yuan Ming still jumped out to stir up trouble. That devilish tone of his was not just a little bit. In any case, he likes you a little bit. You might as well pounce on him. What is more important than cultivation? Truly a foolish woman. Shut up. Hellion Vivian only gave Yuan Ming 3 words. Yuan Ming hooked his thin lips carelessly. Even if you don't pounce on him now, you still have 8 days at most. What are you hesitating for? Do you want me to burn you, Hellion Vivian's tone carried a hint of threat. Yuan Ming snorted twice. I won't say any more, I won't say any more. 8 days, you remember 8 days. Hellion Wei Wei had a bit of a headache, so she simply cut off the telepathic communication with Yuan Ming. When she raised her eyes, she discovered that Bailey Jia Ju was looking at her. His thin lips even carried a bit of devilishness as he said, "If you had always been so obedient, I wouldn't have gotten angry." Lock himself up. Was this considered obedient? Sigh. Sure enough, that was what His Highness was thinking. So, she went to the bathroom. Hellion Vivian unlocked herself and locked herself up again. She was so familiar with it that she couldn't be more familiar with it. So when the little 7th prince came over, he was a little confused about what was going on. Because this was the first time he had seen someone who was willing to lock themselves up. So she instinctively asked Beligaju, "Third brother, what is third sister-in-law doing?" "Your third sister-in-law likes to play role-play." Beligaju leisurely crossed his legs and put his arms behind his head. His tone was cold and there wasn't a trace of change in it, as if he was just stating a fact. The little seventh prince already understood what role-play meant. This was all thanks to His Highness' special education. So when he said these words, he glanced at Hellion Vivian. "So third sister-in-law likes this." Hellion Vivian. "Ha ha ha. Who is this person who likes to play role-play?" "Yes." Beligaju had already answered for her. The little seventh prince tilted his head and thought for a moment, then said, "But I want to eat snake meat. I've already put the snake head at the door." "Third sister-in-law, don't you know how to cook? Let third sister-in-law roast it for me." "Do you think your third sister-in-law is a chef?" Beligaju glanced at him, and only pigs like to eat snakes. The dignified little seventh prince hesitated for a moment and said, "I just took the snake head to feed the pig, but the pig didn't eat it and kept trembling." "Why are you feeding the pig snake?" Beligaju raised an eyebrow. The little seventh prince was very domineering, "To fatten it up and eat it. The pig won't eat anything you feed it, because it already knows what you're trying to do," Beligaju said as he adjusted his sleeves. The little seventh prince frowned. "Then I'll hide in a corner and secretly feed it in the future." Hellion Vivian. So this was how His Highness usually tricked children. The pig was obviously scared by the snake head. What did he mean by knowing what little seventh prince was trying to do? "Then can I ask third sister-in-law to roast the snake for me first? After that, I'll go feed the pig." Obviously, Beligaju underestimated his little brother's obsession with food. He glanced at the little one again. "Sure." After getting Beligaju's approval, the little one was very happy. He strode with his short legs and wanted to carry the snake head in. Beligaju continued, "But you have to dance first." Hearing this, the little one's back shook and he subconsciously covered his little butt with his hands. That action was so cute that Hellion Vivian couldn't help but laugh out loud. "There's no need to dance." "But isn't the snake a demonic beast? Will it be bad to eat it?" Hellion Vivian only knew that if it was a spirit beast, it might be helpful for cultivation. However, only people who were evil cultivators could eat it. If it was a demonic beast, wouldn't it be more disadvantageous? The little one put on a serious face. "I can eat anything." Hellion Vivian face-bombed. "I know you're a foodie." She never doubted little Seventh's ability to eat. What she considered was the consequences. "It's okay," Beligaju spoke at this time and his voice was calm. "He can digest anything." Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. What is his stomach made of? Beligaju didn't say anything. The little one took out a meat bun from his pocket and said, "I'll eat this first." As he ate, he seemed to have thought of something and said fiercely, "Oh right, when the dean gave me the meat bun, he wanted me to tell third sister-in-law that he's going to announce the content of the third test. You should tell her first." Hellion Vivian felt defeated for the first time. But the lock on her hand. Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju again. "I'll be back in a while." Beligaju's eyes were cold, but he didn't agree. Hellion Vivian smiled. She felt that he was like a noble and lazy Persian cat. She couldn't go wrong by stroking his fur. Thus, she turned her face to the side and kissed him on the forehead with a slight smile on her lips. Beligaju's fingers froze. Before he could react, the person beside him was gone. Hellion Vivian didn't stay for long. She carried little seventh prince and rushed to the underground palace. Bailey Jia Ju furrowed his long eyebrows. After that, he suddenly leaped up and stood up. His slender fingers fell on the area that Wei Wei had just touched. Chapter 334. Your Highness. When Shadow walked in from the outside, he saw Bailey Jiaju's appearance. His pair of eyes flashed with a trace of heavy astonishment. His Highness is, smiling. Since young, His Highness had always been a person who did not show his emotions. He would sneer, laugh evilly, and smile faintly. But he was rarely like this. Is there something good happening today? But the Princess Consort is not here. Shadow could not understand his master's thoughts. He bowed his head respectfully and knelt on the ground. We have news about the hidden ground beast. Helian Guangyao has been suspecting that the Princess Consort has been possessed, so he sent people into the academy to investigate. Helian Guangyao. Beligaju turned the ring on his finger. His eyes were deep. It's not him. He doesn't have the ability to summon the hidden ground beast. Continue investigating. Shadow received the order and was about to leave. Yet she heard Bailey Jiaju continue to say, investigate from within the White Academy. Yes. Shadow lowered his eyes, but his heart was in a mess. Does Master mean that the person who harmed me and the Princess Consort is most likely a student and a teacher? When Aning thought of this, he broke out in cold sweat. When he looked back, he saw that His Highness had returned to his previous posture. His finger brushed across his forehead, and then he sneered. He seemed to have said something. You've learned to be smart this time. Indeed, it's better to lock up the prey. At noon, in the underground palace. Tu Feng stood up from his chair and looked at the row of students in front of him. His eyes were gloomy. The last test was not supposed to be so early, but yesterday, we lost another outstanding member. Is it because of the blood snake demon? The one who spoke was an outstanding member selected from the 4 great families. Tu Feng glanced in his direction. No, there's a problem in the Forest of Fantasy. Helian Vivian held the little 7th prince's hand and frowned. He hadn't thought about what to do next. Tu Feng's voice was calm as he said, the battle spirit forces need you all, fresh blood. Therefore, the test has been brought forward. I want you all to show your true strength to face this test, because this test is not only about winning or losing, but also life and death. If you are caught, you can only save yourselves. As he spoke, Tu Feng spread the letter in his hand on the wooden table, indicating for them to come over and take a look. Tonight, there will be an auction in the capital. Speaking up to hear, Tu Feng paused for a moment. This auction is personally organized by the Armament City's city lord. When the time comes, there will be countless martial arts aristocratic families participating in this auction. I want you guys to think of a way to get close to this person. After that, find out what he's been doing recently. Helian Vivian looked at the name on the letter and raised an eyebrow. Murong Hongtu. Isn't this Empress Murong's younger brother, Murong Chongfeng's uncle? A rank 1 minister of the imperial court, who also held some military power, usually did things very arrogantly. If he was a barbarian, it would be easy to deal with him. However, Murong Hongtu was a very smart person. The things he did could be said to be ruthless and inhumane, but he would never let the imperial family get hold of his weakness. Even those ministers who were loyal to the retired emperor would not dare to provoke such a person. Now, if they were to ask these immature people to go over, they might be able to see through their disguise in a few seconds. 4 people had already been eliminated from the first 2 tests. Now, the remaining 6 people, other than Helian Vivian and the rest, were the 2 outstanding people selected from the 4 influential families. We'll complete the mission. Probably because they were very confident in themselves, the 2 people looked at each other, then looked at Yun Biluo. Yun Biluo expressed that she had no problem with it. Helian Vivian naturally did not say anything, she just listened quietly. If the other party was Murong Hongtu, there was one thing that they had to pay attention to. It was unknown if it was because he had done too many bad things, but he would always bring a group of experts with him when he went out. In order to get information from Murong Hongtu without making a sound, the first thing they had to deal with was this group of experts. You can choose your favorite martial practice and outfit. I don't care what method you use to get close to him, my only request is to keep this test a secret. At the same time when Tu Su Feng finished speaking, everyone had quickly chosen their own equipment. They stood in a straight line in front of Tu Su Feng. It was not difficult for Tu Su Feng to get the invitation to the auction. However, they could not enter as students of the White Academy. This operation was undoubtedly more difficult to deal with than the one-on-one tests. Not only did it require the cooperation of the team, but it also required the individual's ability to stand out in the team. It was simply too difficult. Moreover, the two young masters of the four influential families obviously only knew the theory but had never put it into practice. After taking the task, they began to arrange the members. Logically speaking, their method of seduction was not bad. Yun Biluo's appearance was enough to attract Murong Hongtu's attention. However, they arranged Hellion Vivian, who had performed the best during this period, to be in the corner and let Hellion Vivian be the lookout. Yuan Ming sneered, "These people are doing this on purpose. You have already won twice, so they simply don't want you to have a chance to perform in this test. This kind of method is really somewhat unpresentable." Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and tidied up her waiter outfit, her expression indifferent. Things won't go according to their plan. The seduction won't have much effect on Murong Hongtu. I saw you nodding just now, so I thought you agreed with their plan. Xiao Bai also spoke, her voice was cold. Hellion Wei Wei stood up straight. I did agree, but as a person, you should always have a backup plan. They had to make a move on a person. They had to figure out what this person was interested in before they could have a chance to get close to him. This was the most important step in Hellion Vivian's opinion. However, these people had omitted this step. However, for Yun Biluo and the other two young masters who had been Deadpool, they more or less understood Murong Hongtu. At least compared to Han Yu and Xiao Qi, they had a relative advantage. The auction was organized by the city master of Armament City, so of course, it was up to Han Yu to arrange how to secretly enter the auction. In fact, they did not need Hellion Vivian to sneak into the auction as a waiter. Han Yu could easily find out where Murong Hongtu was sitting without anyone noticing. Here, Han Yu could easily find out where Murong Hongtu was sitting. Therefore, this was also the reason why Yuan Ming said that they did not want to give Hellion Wei Wei any chance to perform. Chapter 335. Young Master Han. A man dressed as a steward walked out of the dazzling auction house. He smiled when he saw Han Yu. Who are these people? Han Yu's expression was indifferent. My friends. So they are young Master Han's friends. Please come in. The steward led the few of them in. Along the way, he could not help but turn around to take a few glances at Yun Biluo, who was wearing a veil. He did not know which family this beautiful lady belonged to, but since she came with young Master Han, she must be from an extraordinary background. They looked at each other as soon as they entered the auction house. They looked at each other with a look that only they could understand and went to different positions. Hellion Wei Wei didn't really wear a set of waiter's clothes. Instead, she draped a green and white robe over her shoulders. She held a fan in her hand and a jade pendant hung on her waist. Every part of her was clearly graceful and luxurious. She looked like a young master from an aristocratic family who came to participate in the auction. However, she had a unique hobby. She did not bring a single servant with her. She walked casually to the second floor. The corridor on the second floor was filled with martial artists carrying swords and wearing long robes. Hellion Wei Wei knew that she couldn't force her way into this place as soon as she walked in. Young master, please show your waist token. The martial artist guarding the corridor reached out and stopped her, his face expressionless. Waist token. The light in Wei Wei's eyes slightly flashed. She saw that there was also a big-bellied wealthy merchant who came up together with her. His body tilted, pretending to be drunk as he pressed his hand to his forehead. After that, his other hand casually threw the waist token that he'd just stolen to that martial artist. His careless and arrogant attitude instead made that martial artist start to guess the identity of this young man in the end. Without the slightest delay, he let Wei Wei pass. The big-bellied rich businessman was still hugging his newly married concubine affectionately. He did not realize that his waist token was gone. He pinched the woman's chin and said, "Wait a moment. I'll show you how many good things General Murong has." "What is it?" The woman also knew how to make people happy. She followed the rich merchant like water. The merchant smiled mysteriously. "We all came from the forest of fantasy. After drinking those things, your little face will definitely become prettier. Then let's go quickly." The woman's eyes lit up. She was really interested. The rich merchant reached out and hugged her. He raised his head and wanted to swagger in. The martial artist stopped him, but the rich merchant didn't care at all. He reached out and touched his waist. Then, his expression suddenly changed. He let go of the woman's hand and shouted anxiously, "Where is my waist token? Why is my waist token gone?" The cultivator glanced at him and didn't give him the slightest bit of face. He snapped his fingers and called for the rich merchant and the woman to be carried out of the building. He didn't need to think to know what would happen to them. This made Hellion Vivian recall the feeling of facing a drug lord in the past. That drug lord also had a bad temper, but was very cunning and suspicious. As long as anyone acted strangely in front of him, he would treat them as an undercover agent and deal with them. Looking at the martial artist's actions, it was not difficult to deduce that Murong Hongtu was a drug lord. However, she still managed to get some useful information. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks and her eyes became deep. He came from the forest of fantasy and drank something that made him young. It must be the spirit beast's blood. When Xiao Baixe said this, her voice was much colder. This Murong Hongtu is most likely the culprit who entered the forest of fantasy and killed a large number of spirit beasts. Woman, if it's really him, you must be careful. Not only are his methods sinister, but they are also inhumane. I'm afraid that you can't handle it. Hellion Vivian waved the paper fan in her hand. She looked like a gentleman and communicated with Xiao Baixe telepathically. Don't worry, I'm good at disguising myself. Hellion Vivian was right. Apart from the military fire, she was also good at disguising herself. Therefore, when she walked into the room, her face quickly changed into an evil smile. The atmosphere in the room was basically what she had imagined. Murong Hongtu didn't come here to participate in the auction. He just needed a secret place to gather all these people. It was a small gathering. Apart from Murong Hongtu, there were 6 to 7 people in the room. There were both men and women. They sat on the sandalwood chairs and chatted with each other. They looked very excited. Hellion Vivian had a feeling that she had entered a cult. However, it only took a moment for her lips to curl into a sloppy smile. I wonder when it will start. I can't wait. Initially, everyone was hesitant when they saw this unfamiliar young man. However, after hearing what Hellion Vivian said, their eyes lit up and they turned to look at Murong Hongtu. Murong Hongtu was still staring at Hellion Vivian. He was in his 40s, but his skin was abnormally pale. Especially his eyes, they were always gloomy and gave people an uncomfortable feeling. However, even under that kind of gaze, Hellion Wei Wei could still sit down like a ruffian. Then, she took out a mirror and looked at her face left and right. I really want to drink that thing and look younger. Murong Hongtooth suddenly laughed out loud. Don't worry. You'll definitely look younger. Not only that, but we'll also live forever. As long as you. As he spoke, he signaled the person standing next to him with his eyes. That person then brought a tray to everyone. Helene Vivian did not understand what it meant at first. When she saw the first white-haired old man put in banknotes, she realized that the other party was collecting money. When the tray was brought to her, Helene Vivian casually threw in 10 banknotes. Each banknote was worth 100,000 yuan. This naturally made Murong Hongtooth take a few more glances at her. Helene Vivian did not seem to notice his gaze. She imitated the expression of the people opposite her, showing desire and greed in her eyes. At this moment, Yun Biluo, who had already prepared everything, walked over gracefully. She heard the two people mention Helene Vivian's name. The main credit goes to us. This time, I'd like to see how she's going to monopolize it. However, how did you come up with this idea? That's amazing. I got the idea after listening to someone else. I don't know who gave me a note with this idea written on it. Yun Biluo's voice gradually faded away. There was a faint smile on her face. It was not very clear, but it was obvious. She did not do anything. She just suggested the idea. After all, one person had to make the decision when it came to teamwork. We're all women. If there's anyone to blame, it's my own fault. I have a toad face and can only do peripheral work. I can't use the beauty trap. Chapter 336. Yun Biluo put down her veil and walked forward with a faint smile on her face. She stopped at the corridor. Your waist tag. The guard stopped her. Yun Biluo looked at the guard with her beautiful eyes. She bowed and spoke in a gentle voice. The guard was intoxicated by her words. He glanced at Yun Biluo and said, "Wait here, I'll go in and report." "Thank you." Yun Biluo retracted her gaze and the smile on her face deepened. In the room on the second floor. General. The guard walked in from outside and whispered in Murong Hongtooth's ear, "The city lord said that he sent a beauty to you." Helene Vivian was sitting beside Murong Hongtooth. Her fingers paused when she heard the guard's words. The beauty should be Yun Biluo and the rest. Yuan Ming smiled evilly. "Woman, I guess that group of people didn't expect you to enter this room earlier than them. They might even think that you're still keeping watch for them outside." Helene Vivian smiled faintly and did not say anything. She raised her wine cup but did not miss any information. Murong Hongtooth smiled when he heard that it was a beauty. However, Helene Vivian felt that his smile was not that simple. Sent by the city lord himself? Murong Hongtooth asked. The guard shook his head. "I think it was sent by young Master Han." "Why are you reporting when you're not sure?" Murong Hongtooth sneered. "Detain her first and ask her where she came from." The guard lowered his head and answered, "Yes." Helene Vivian put down the wine cup in her hand and remained expressionless. Yuan Ming narrowed his thin lips. "Woman, it seems that your companions won't be able to carry out their next plan." Helene Wei did not say anything because Murong Hongtooth, who was sitting next to her, was looking in her direction. His gaze reminded her of a cobra lying in the grass for no reason. Helene Vivian smiled and raised the wine glass in her hand. Only then did Murong Hongtooth's gaze become less terrifying. He smiled again. "I saw that you were listening so seriously just now, so I thought you were interested in a beauty." "Of course, I like beauties, but..." Helene Vivian paused for a moment, and the tip of her tongue swept across her thin lips. "I want to drink what the general is talking about as soon as possible." Murong Hongtooth seemed to be very satisfied with Helene Vivian's answer and laughed out loud again. Then, he put away his expression and gently patted his right hand with his left hand. Bring it up. Yuan Ming, whose nerves had been stretched taut, immediately let out a sigh of relief. That was close. I thought he had discovered something. He is very scary. This was Little White's voice. Yuan Ming glanced sideways at Hellion Vivian, only to see that there wasn't a single ripple of emotion on her face. Instead, her lips curled into a devilish smile. Hellion Vivian took a sip of wine. Seeing that the people in front of her had stood up, she also supported herself on the round table and slowly raised her legs. You will see something more ferocious in a while, but don't think too much about it. You know that you have to sacrifice something in order to stay young forever, Murong Hongtu said as he guided everyone to look into the room. Hellion Vivian walked over and looked at the ceiling. She had goosebumps all over her body. Some people even covered their mouths with an ugly expression. Murong Hongtu glanced at that person. That person finally managed to control his emotions. However, the scene in front of them was indeed a little too much. There were two small corpses hanging on the ceiling. The corpses seemed to have become drainage pipes that acted as a link between the two. Drops of blood flowed down the wooden beam and onto the trapped spirit beasts. Hellion Vivian felt her stomach churn. She knew that whatever reaction she was making now was the right one. If she was too calm, it would seem more fake. Murong Hongtu also knew that it would be difficult for people to get used to such a scene for the first time. He laughed and patted Hellion Vivian's shoulder. You'll get used to it after seeing it a few more times. Think about the benefits of drinking it. Hellion Vivian gave Murong Hongtu a smile. Murong Hongtu walked past her and strolled to the spirit beast. Like a barbarian eating raw meat, he opened the spirit beast's head and drank a mouthful of blood. Hellion Vivian furrowed her brows, but the smile on her face did not fade at all. She looked at the spirit beast in front of her. It seemed to have just died not long ago. Its eyes were closed and its mouth was half open. Its head and body were dry and shriveled. Its limbs were as thin as reeds. It was indescribably horrifying. After Murong Hongtu drank a mouthful of blood, his eyes lit up. It was almost visible to the naked eye. He seemed to have become more energetic. He looked at Hellion Vivian and the others and said with a smile, "This feels good." When the white-haired old man saw this scene, he couldn't hold it in any longer. Although the sight of the two corpses made him tremble a little. Despite that, the elder's pursuit of immortality had driven him a little crazy. He closed his eyes and buried his face in another spirit beast's head. When he looked up, he felt like he was floating in the air, and he felt like he had endless energy in his body. Great! Murong Hongtu laughed. Who's next? A rich businessman in his 40s had already walked over, but in the end, he shook his head. No, I'll pass. I have children too, what's the harm in trying? Murong Hongtu was still smiling. However, Hellion Vivian did not miss the gloomy look in his eyes. The rich businessman shook his head. His expression was terrible. I'll pass, he did not finish the word pass. Then, a swoosh was heard. Murong Hongtu, who was standing in front of him, gave him a hard stab. You don't even have the guts to do that, and you still want to live forever. Murong Hongtu pushed the rich businessman away with his finger. The rich businessman twitched on the floor a few times. Murong Hongtu waved his hand at the guards and looked a little impatient. Take him away. He's really affecting other people's appetite. In the blink of an eye, a person's life was gone. Hellion Vivian realized that the person standing in front of her was inhumane. It seemed that not only did she have to secretly investigate Murong Hongtu's recent whereabouts, but she also had to think of a way to escape. Wei, you can't drink that blood. Little White jumped out and hit its body. There was vigilance in its eyes. This is not an ordinary spirit beast's blood. They did something to it. Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. You mean the two children just now? That's right. Little White lowered its voice. Although they hid it well, judging from the layout, it looks like a small sacrificial ceremony. Using children's blood as a sacrificial ceremony, the spirit beast's blood will be tainted with evil energy. Once a person drinks it, they will be unable to stop. So, you can't break the seal. Chapter 337. Helian Wei Wei lowered her eyes and listened. She quickly started to think of a way to escape in a moment. There were not many people in the room. Those who wanted to be immortal had already hugged the head of the spirit beast and started drinking. They looked like people who had taken drugs, excited and confused. Helian Vivian followed suit. She knew that she had to make herself move. If she refused directly, Murong Hongtu would definitely kill her like how he killed the rich businessman just now. Of course, he might not be able to defeat her. However, Helian Vivian did not forget about today's mission. Tu Sufeng only asked them to inquire about Murong Hongtu's latest news because he wanted to keep a low profile so as not to alert the enemy. Therefore, she could not make a move. Why aren't you drinking? The old lady who was standing next to Helian Vivian looked at Helian Vivian in confusion. Helian Vivian did not say anything. Murong Hongtu suddenly opened his gloomy eyes and glanced at her coldly. Helian Vivian smiled. I have to ask how it tastes first. Besides, it's rare to have such good food. I have to taste it slowly. As she spoke, she looked up and glanced at the guard next to her. Bring me a wine glass. Little brother, you're a person who knows how to enjoy life. Murong Hongtu laughed. Bring me a wine glass too. Helian Vivian smiled and scooped up the blood with the wine glass. Then, she waved her sleeves. I'll drink first. Murong Hongtu stared at her without blinking. When he saw that her cup was empty and there was blood at the corner of her mouth, he retracted his gaze and called out to the others, Come on, let's all have a toast. Amidst the jubilation, everyone had a bewitching smile on their faces. Xiao Bai frowned worriedly. Woman, you didn't really drink it, did you? Why would I? Helian Vivian clung to her sleeves and coughed softly. There was still a taste of blood in her throat. Yuan Ming laughed. Woman, you are really cruel to yourself. In order to stain her thin lips with blood, she had used her inner force to shake her meridians. Only this woman could do such a thing. Helian Vivian smiled with a jade-like aura. With her left hand pressed down, she talked and laughed with the people beside her while adjusting her aura. However, at this moment, the old woman seemed to have gone crazy. She sniffed left and right and licked the corner of her mouth with the tip of her bloody tongue. She gave people a strange and terrifying feeling. What is that smell on you? Why is it so sweet? Helian Vivian took a deep breath and smiled. What smell can I have? This room reeks of blood. Are you sure you're not mistaken? Is that so? The old woman's face was full of doubt. She lowered her head and thought for a while. Then, she called the person leaning on the wooden chair next to her. Smell him. Doesn't he smell good? Hearing this, the man looked at Helian Vivian. Little White stepped back subconsciously. It was worried that some people would notice the existence of the spirit beast after drinking it for the first time. However, Helian Vivian knew that it was very likely that they would ask about the blood hidden in her sleeve. It does smell good. It smells good. The man's expression was even more intoxicated than the old woman's. He gradually bent down. Helian Vivian's fingers tightened, but her eyes were as calm as usual. The two of them looked at each other and then walked closer to Helian Vivian step by step, it does smell good. Murong Hongtu grinned. There was still blood at the corner of his mouth. He turned to look at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian did not move, but she knew what kind of situation she was in. Facing these people who were drooling at her, she felt that these people were not human at all. They were zombies who had lost all their senses except for their sense of smell. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. She held her breath in her palm, but there was no panic on her face. Instead, she made people feel that there was nothing wrong with her. You all have a good sense of smell. Murong Hongtu smiled again. He walked past Hellion Vivian again and pulled the rope hanging on the beam. The smell is coming from this guy. He must have contracted a high-level spirit beast. That's why he can smell so good. As he spoke, Murong Hongtu's fingers tightened and a swoosh was heard. A man in white and green fell down. His body was still tied with an iron chain. The iron chain was specially used to tie up spirit beasts. It was more than enough to deal with humans. The man's head was half lowered. Both of his hands were tied to the beam. His black hair was scattered around the corners of his eyes, just enough to cover his deep and serene eyes. What was exposed was his chiseled jaw and white, straight nose. It was probably because he was put down that the man slowly raised his head. That kind of arrogance and indifference, even though he appeared in this manner, he still couldn't change his stunning appearance. It's him. Hellion Wei Wei looked in astonishment at the man who, even though he was hung up, still showed a lofty and cold temperament. Her shapely eyebrows slightly furrowed. The situation seemed to be a little out of her control. When she came out, wasn't he still in the academy? How could he be kidnapped in the blink of an eye? Just as Wei Wei was thinking, she saw that Bailey Jia Ju had already set his gaze on her body. That sexy thin lips slightly curved upwards, looking a bit more flirtatious than usual, only because of the faintly discernible fragrance and the soaring smell of blood at the tip of her nose. After coming out from the cliff, Beligaju began to investigate the spirit beasts. At that time, he was not very enthusiastic. If it were not for the appearance of magical beasts in the White Academy, he would not have come personally. He wouldn't come in person either. He had already noticed Murong Hongtu's strangeness from the very beginning. However, he didn't like to eliminate his enemy in one move. He wanted to play slowly. Wouldn't that be more fun? But Murong Hongtu was the first person who dared to kidnap him. Bailey Jia Ju's beautiful peach blossom eyes narrowed and once again fell on Wei Wei's body, his long eyebrows wrinkled. Isn't that your man? Yuan Ming's tone became more and more evil. Why is he tied up? Hellion Vivian gave Yuan Ming a very standard answer. He likes to play role-play. Based on her understanding of His Highness, he must have sent himself to be tied up. Such a wicked hobby. Hellion Vivian shook her head in her heart. She heard Murong Hongtu sneered and said, "This person walked around the door twice and thought he could hide from me. Ha, how naive." As he said, he took the sharp knife and smiled strangely. With such a good talent, the blood must taste good. It can be used as a catalyst for the spirit beasts in your body. Chapter 338. Ha! Bailey Jia Ju looked at Murong Hongtu and suddenly let out a low laugh. He lifted his chin slightly. The lines of his face were perfect. That kind of innate nobility made him appear cold and graceful even though he appeared in this posture. Murong Hongtu's face became even more twisted when he saw his posture. You're not afraid of death. Do you know what you're tied up with? There are only 2 Xianming iron chains in the world. If I pinch it gently, Murong Hongtu did not finish his sentence because he saw the man in front of him lift his left hand. Crack! The iron chain was forcibly broken. Broke. How was this possible? Murong Hongtu's eyes widened as he stood rooted to the ground. Beligaju smiled faintly as he rotated his left wrist. His legs were long and straight, his waist was thin, and his chest was wide. They formed a perfect inverted triangle shape. He reached out and brushed the non-existent dust off his clothes. He waved his sleeves and the air shook violently. The remaining iron chains wrapped around his body broke one after another. Murong Hongtu could not say a word at this moment. What? Why did you stop? Bailey Jiaju's ink-like long hair floated to the ground. His ink-like pupils emitted a demonic and dazzling light, carrying a noble aura that was hard to ignore. He slowly walked toward Murong Hongtu. His black robe wrapped around his slender figure, revealing a cold murderous aura. When he walked to Murong Hongtu's side, his appearance changed. He still had that handsome face, but his expression was sinister and vicious. His eyes were cold and indifferent. Murong Hongtu squinted his eyes and threw the 3 knives in his hand at Beligaju. Beligaju's body swayed. No one saw how he moved, but when Murong Hongtu realized what was going on, the 3 knives were already in Beligaju's hands and were thrown to the ground like scrap iron. Those were not ordinary knives. Not only did it have martial chi, but it was also made for him by his master. It wouldn't be a problem for him to kill the sea dragon race. This kind of martial cultivator was actually blocked by a single move. You, who the hell are you? Murong Hongtu trembled as his fingers curled up. He instinctively wanted to run away. Beligaju smiled coldly and slowly reached out his hand. With a loud clang, Murong Hongtu was sent flying into the corner of the wall. A large amount of dust fell from the wall. He straightened his body, his neck was crooked, and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. The private room was in a complete mess. Except for Helly and Vivian, no one could move or speak. Only then did they realize that from the very beginning, Beligaju had created a huge barrier. Everyone who was within the barrier had nowhere to run. Fire Qilin, your contracted divine beast is a fire Qilin. Murong Hongtu looked at the faintly discernible divine beast's shadow behind the man. He was so regretful that even his intestines turned green. He never thought that this divine beast with a sweet smell would be a fire Qilin. That was strange. If it was a fire Qilin, he would have sensed the danger from it from the very beginning. The fire Qilin laughed evilly. Tisk, tsk, tsk. You just casually covered your breath and I treated you like a little white rabbit. At this moment, Murong Hongtu finally understood that everything was a trap. A trap waiting for him to fall into the trap. However, these stupid humans. Did they really think that they could deal with him like this? Ha ha ha, this was simply wishful thinking. Murong Hongtu glanced at Beligaju and stuck out his tongue. He licked his thin lips and laughed eerily like a baby. The fire Qilin could only deal with me when I was demonized when I was with that person. Now. You're just a barbarian tamed by humans. There was a path to heaven, but you didn't want to take it. Demonized. Hellion Wei Wei furrowed her brows. As soon as she looked up, she saw a translucent shadow floating above Murong Hongtu's head. The shadow's appearance was distorted, like a dead baby. Its black nails were buried in Murong Hongtu's hair. It was inexplicably scary. Woman, be careful. This Murong Hongtu is no longer a human. Yuan Ming suddenly said. It was very rare to see such a serious expression. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. She didn't have time to ask how Murong Hongtu became like this. Because she could clearly feel that the surrounding atmosphere had changed. When she turned around, she finally understood why the atmosphere had changed. Those people who were sniffing around her just now had obviously lost their minds. They walked toward her and Bailey Jiaju with dull expressions on their faces. If those people just looked like zombies, then they were now real ghosts. Just by looking at those blood-red eyes, it was obvious that it was because they had just drunk the blood of the divine beast. Woman, don't be bitten by them. Yuan Ming directly revealed his figure. The group of people paused and bared their teeth. They seemed to be afraid of Yuan Ming's existence. Some of them didn't dare to get close. Then, they looked at Beligaju with greedy eyes. Bailey Jiaju stood in front of Murong Hongtu with a murderous aura all over his body. His whole body exuded an indescribable coldness and cruelty. His eyes were calm as he watched the scene, his long eyebrows slightly furrowed. Woman, quickly think of a way. I haven't fully recovered yet. They will only be afraid of me for a while. After a while, I will have to return to the fantasy space. Yuan Ming's forehead was full of sweat. So, quickly. So there is one more. Murong Hongtu let out a sinister laugh. His dark red eyes looked at Hellion Weiwei and said, I thought you drank the blood just now. Since you don't want to drink it, then you can just wait to be sucked dry. The devil's emissary behind you won't be able to hold on for long. Besides, what can such a small amount of magic do to me? Sure enough, just like what Master said, you humans are always so full of yourselves. You're so stupid that you really believe in immortality. Ha ha ha. Master. In other words, there was a mastermind behind Murong Hongtu. Hellion Weiwei gradually understood something in her heart. Then, she raised her eyebrows and used a provocative tone in her voice. Since your master is so powerful, why doesn't he even dare to show his face? He's clearly a coward. You're not allowed to slander my master. The baby on top of Murong Hongtu's head screamed. His sharp voice sounded like a cat crying in the dark. Master, he's the most gentle and intelligent person in the world. His jade-like temperament is as beautiful as his soul. He's not someone you filthy humans can compare to. Chapter 339. As Murong Hongtu spoke, he touched the dead spirit beasts again. Just a little more, and I can complete the task given by my master and destroy the peaceful aura here. Who's the one who wants to kill you too? The blue eyes of the baby on top of his head glowed faintly and suddenly stared at Beligaju. You. I can feel the endless evil aura on your body. If I have your soul, it will definitely be twice the work with half the result. Bailey Jiaju's beautiful peach blossom eyes narrowed. He still hadn't moved when the fire Qilin behind him suddenly blocked in front of him. Its fiery red fur was exceptionally beautiful and hard. If I were you, I wouldn't have any ideas about my master. Fire Qilin, I don't want to fight with you head-on. Are you sure you want to continue staying here? This Yin Qi will also drive you crazy. The baby laughed loudly again. The fire Qilin clenched its claws. It didn't like this room, but it couldn't explain why it didn't like it. It was only when Bailey Jiaju mentioned that he wanted to destroy the peaceful Qi here that it suddenly realized something. It looked at the fog that was overflowing from the roof and turned to Bailey Jiaju, saying, Master, you can't stay here. The Yin Qi here would directly affect its master who was already missing a soul. They must leave this place as soon as possible. Following the fire Qilin's words, Hellion Vivian saw something black running out from the corner of the wall. It's a rat. Xiao Bai said in a deep voice, Weiwei, you must stop him. Once the auspicious aura here is destroyed, the White Academy will be affected as well. Hellion Vivian's eyes slowly darkened at this moment. Her small face became colder and colder. She didn't know why, but a bad premonition rose in her heart. Those rats ran back and forth in the room like flies that had lost their direction. After running a few steps, they fell in the corner of the wall. Waves of fishy smell emitted from their bodies, spraying everywhere. When those people saw this, not only were they not afraid, they were even more excited. Helene Vivian felt more and more that the people standing in front of her could no longer be considered as human beings. Her gaze turned colder. Murong Hongtut sized up the two people in front of him. In the end, he did not choose to attack Beligaju, who had the fire Chelan, to protect himself. Instead, he set his blue eyes on Helene Vivian. Helene Vivian had just narrowed her eyes when she realized that the baby on top of Murong Hongtut's head had suddenly disappeared. Helene Vivian paused and immediately turned her head around. She saw the baby sticking close to her back. Its black claws were extended as if it wanted to bury itself in her body. Whoosh! Helene Vivian immediately slashed with the dagger in her hand. The baby didn't even seem to feel the pain as he extended his claws even further. In a flash, Beligaju moved. When he reached out to pull Helene Vivian over, his arm was viciously scratched by the black claws. His ivory-white sleeve was cut open and bright red blood immediately flowed out. Yuan Ming's face was so pale that only a faint image could be seen. Oh no, whoever the abandoned baby demonic beast grabs will go crazy. If we don't find a way to break its great demonic curse soon, your man might follow suit and bite. When Helene Vivian heard this, her calm thin lips tightly pursed. She had no other good points. She was protective of her own people. When she saw that Beligaju's arm was bleeding, her usually indolent little face revealed a strong murderous intent. Murong Hongtut was very disapproving. You've been blocked. I originally wanted to offer your souls to my master. Since you're so disobedient, you can go down and join them. Following Murong Hongtut's words, small expressionless faces suddenly appeared on the roof beam. It turned out that the entire house was hiding corpses. They were all half-grown little people floating in midair. The resentment was getting thicker and thicker, gradually covering the roof beam. Wisps of black fog began to linger and condensed into a whirlpool, as if it was going to suck everyone in. They were like puppets that were controlled by a wireless string. Their fingers stretched out and swayed back and forth one after another. Ferocious, lustful, murderous, and indulgent, they tried to grab hold of anything to climb up or pull people down into the dark underworld. Helene Wei didn't know why, but an image appeared in her mind. It was as if she had seen this scene somewhere before. The sense of familiarity made her almost subconsciously cut her finger with the blade. Her blood dripped onto the ground, but she was unmoved. Her eyes widened as she chanted the spell, "May I end the future tribulation. I should be responsible for the suffering of all living things. I set up a wide range of conveniences so that you can be free. Let all have feelings, the root of goodness is not corrupted, the foot of God is unhindered, like the void. Eliminate all habits of confusion, like the scorching sun dispelling light ice. Listen to my command, unsheath and slay evil." In an instant, the air around Helene Vivian seemed to have a current of air. It rapidly gathered from all directions, forming a shape that resembled the 8 trigrams formation behind her. It also looked like an ancient spell that was formed by many complex scriptures. It did not look very real. However, this alone was enough to make the expression of the baby on top of Murong Hongtut's head change. That was the 8 trigrams exorcism formation. The people of the exorcising tribe should have all died long ago. This woman, how could she? As Murong Hongtut's eyes widened, Helene Vivian waved her hand slightly and uttered the last sentence, "With my life, I command the winds and clouds of the world." Whoosh! The 5 elements 8 trigrams formation behind her was like a tumbling net that suddenly covered Murong Hongtut. Then, it fiercely tightened. The whirlpool seemed to be penetrated by some kind of force. The black fog quickly dissipated, and the expressionless little face gradually twisted and peeled off. A tearing sound was heard. His sleeves were torn apart. In the blink of an eye, all the black fog was sealed back into the beam. The baby looked at the room that he had painstakingly set up for so long and screamed unwillingly. He rushed over and wanted to bite Beligaju, who was closest to him. However, before he could touch the man's sleeves, he was stopped in mid-air by an invisible force. Only then did the baby realize that the man's eyes were not the usual black. They were black that was mixed with golden light. The feeling of being burned came from the corner of his mouth. The baby's eyes widened in an instant. He looked at Beligaju's eyes and shook back and forth. This man could actually release martial chi after his arm was grabbed by the baby. Why? Why was that? The baby knew that he was about to be burned. That was why he could not understand. Other than his master, no one could deal with him when he was demonized, unless... Chapter 340. The baby did not continue to think about it. It was not for any other reason but because before it could react, it had been burned into a puddle of black water. When the black water splashed onto the ground, a sizzling sound was heard. The resentment completely disappeared, and the room finally regained its tranquility. The people lying on the ground pressed their foreheads, as if they didn't know what had happened at all. Their heads swayed back and forth, and when they saw the dead rats beside them, their faces instantly turned pale, and they immediately stood up. However, before they could take a step, they were surrounded in the middle of the room by a group of royal shadow guards who had barged in. Hellion Vivian then realized that His Highness did not barge into the campsite alone but had already set up an ambush. Take all of them away. Beligaju glanced at Murong Hongtu, who was cowering in the corner. He spoke casually. The dim light in the room seemed to accentuate his extraordinary identity and reflected his noble temperament. Tell the public that General Murong is an unscrupulous person who accepts bribes. Yes. The shadow guards were very efficient and secretive. They did not leave behind any clues and restored the room to its original state in a short while. The guards inside and outside the room were silently replaced by Beligaju's men, so even the organizer of the auction did not know what had happened here. In addition, there was a wizardry barrier set up in this room. Even if there was a commotion inside, the people outside would not hear anything. Previously, when Yunbiluo was taken away, the rest of the people had also evacuated from their original positions, so they did not see the scene of the shadow guards. Instead, they were still thinking of ways to get Yunbiluo to escape without a change in her expression. However, at this moment, Hellion Vivian, who they thought was chased out of the room, had already gotten all the information she wanted. However, this news was not good news, especially when it was facing a morgue. It sent chills down one's spine. Although the baby was gone, it was still uncomfortable to stay in such a room. However, His Highness was not affected at all. Not only was he not affected, but he even set up a wizardry barrier again after the shadow guards left and pressed her against the wooden door. The flickering light shone on his chiseled facial features, making him look ambiguous. Compared to his handsome face, his eyes were even more beautiful. They were like amber gems, extremely beautiful. Hellion Vivian sighed softly. She could smell the unique scent of the man as she breathed. The peach blossom eyes that were supposed to be as cold as ice were now filled with danger. When their eyes met, Hellion Vivian suddenly remembered the kiss she had on Beligaju's forehead before she left. She glanced at the man and felt a little embarrassed. She wanted to shake her head to avoid the other party. Who would have thought that with only a distance of 5 centimeters, Bailey Jiaju would place his arm behind her back. His body was slanted, and he leaned his head close to her ear. He said in a low voice, "Who gave you the courage to even kiss me?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Just as she was about to speak, her lips were covered by someone. Beligaju pinned her down with an amazing strength, not allowing her to break free at all. An irresistible gaze, action, breath, rushed toward her. Ugh! Hellion Vivian wanted to turn her head to avoid the other party's aggressive approach, but in an instant, a hand clasped the back of her head forcefully. Therefore, the contact was deeper, exchanging breaths with each other. Her tongue that was being sucked tried to dodge, but it felt more like a response. Beligaju's eyes darkened. As he sucked on Hellion Vivian's lips, he loosened his grip on her wrist. His large hand gradually slid down and reached under her clothes. Hellion Vivian suddenly trembled. The cold touch made it impossible for her to hold on to anything. She could only pant slightly and try to push him away. It wasn't that she couldn't hear the sound outside, but because she could hear it, Hellion Vivian felt her whole body tremble inexplicably. However, Beligaju's hand became even more aggressive as it moved upwards. His fingers needed the softness that he loved so much that he couldn't bear to part with it. Hellion Vivian's body couldn't help but bounce, as if every nerve ending had been electrified. Does it feel good? Beligaju held half of her softness with one hand, but his lips didn't let go of her at all. He kept sucking and kissing her neck, making her feel as if she was going to go numb. Hellion Vivian was like a cooked shrimp. Even if she resisted with all her might, she couldn't escape from Beligaju's hands except for her instinctive shaking. Do you want to feel more comfortable? Beligaju's whisper echoed in Hellion Vivian's ears like a curse. Hellion Vivian didn't understand what was going on with her body. It was probably because she had already dual cultivated, so her resistance to this was extremely low. Her fingers tried to push him away, but her body instinctively craved for further comfort. You're not going to say it? Beligaju's deep eyes flashed. He stopped what he was doing and lowered his head. With a hoarse voice, he bit her softness through her clothes. You can't do this, don't do this. Hellion Weiwei's legs were trembling, and her long hair was messy. She leaned her forehead against Beligaju's shoulder. She bit her thin lips slightly, and there was a fatal weakness in the corner of her eyes. You're so stubborn. Beligaju opened his mouth and sucked on Hellion Vivian's earlobe. His handsome face carried a devilish charm. Do you know that when you wear men's clothes, I want to press you under me and ruthlessly destroy you? Along with the kiss, Beligaju's words were like sounds that directly hit the brain, making Hellion Vivian's already numb softness even more unlike her own. She couldn't help but straighten her neck. Because the other party's strength was getting stronger and stronger, that kind of forceful but gentle kneading made her heart stop beating. When she was drugged, she only felt that Beligaju's entire body was cold. If he pounced on her, it would definitely reduce her heat. As for the other feelings, she didn't remember clearly. She only remembered that he made her sit on his waist and thoroughly penetrated that part. At that time, she was infatuated and felt comfortable. But she still didn't taste the specifics. When she woke up the next day, she only felt pain. This man, when doing this kind of thing, wasn't indifferent at all. Not only was he not indifferent, he was even a little charming. She didn't know how he learned this experience. Evildoer, he was indeed an evildoer. Hellion Vivian knew that she was not his opponent, so she simply relaxed her body. If I were His Highness, I definitely wouldn't choose this kind of room to coerce and lure prey. Chapter 341. Ha! Beligaju stopped what he was doing and looked at her with interest. Then, he lifted her up and slid his fingers across her long legs, making her wrap her arms around his waist in that position. His thin lips pressed against hers, and his voice was a little naughty. You'll want to feel more in a room like this, won't you? That tone was like a cat playing with a mouse. He was not in a hurry to kill the prey, but only nibbled at it bit by bit, looking for the best position to bite. However, it was hard for Hellion Wei Wei to ignore the heat that was pressing against her. Just like that, he rubbed the softness of her legs with his fingers through her clothes, and there was a seductive sexiness in his eyes. Hellion Vivian bit her thin lips and wanted to push his hand away, but she was a little sensitive because of his heat. "Open your mouth." She suddenly heard Bailey Jia Ju's words. His tone was cold and commanding. He didn't know that his low and magnetic voice, which was like a musical instrument, could attract the hearts of many women with his low murmur. He had never paid attention to it before. He also didn't know that there was a hint of provocation hidden in the cold and elegant languor on his body. Hellion Vivian paused for a moment when she felt a tingling sensation in her ears. Before she could react, her chin was lifted and Beligaju's lips covered hers again. The force pressing on her lips was neither light nor heavy, it was warm. Then, a breath rushed in. Her breath was filled with the smell of Bailey Jia Ju's body. The faint smell of blood and sandalwood mixed together, as if it was cold yet strong. Being hugged by Beligaju like this, Hellion Vivian could only see darkness. Her heart was beating so fast that she almost could not bear it. Beligaju could not see Hellion Vivian's expression, but he could feel her trembling and panting. It was as if her entire body was being controlled by her own hands. She could not escape, and her weak struggles were of no use at all. It should be like this. Beligaju's lips curved up. He thought that after getting it, he would gradually feel bored. But for some reason, this made him feel particularly fresh and exciting. It was different from everything he had done before. He tried to bite her harder. As expected, Hellion Vivian let out an unbearable moan. Beligaju's body trembled as an electric current flowed through his body. His eyes gradually blurred as the blood in his body began to boil. This gave Beligaju the urge to lick the other party clean. In the past, he would think that his prey was dirty, but now, he only wanted to cover this disobedient person with his aura, or make a mark on the other party's neck. All of Hellion Wei Wei's senses were focused on her neck. That kind of continuous nibbling caused her whole body to heat up a little. What a cute reaction. Beligaju held on to Hellion Vivian's waist. His black eyes flickered with a hint of darkness. For the first time, the excitement brought about by absolute control made Beligaju have the urge to lose control and destroy. Yes, he wanted to hurt her, and even make her cry. Thinking of this, Beligaju stopped in time and pushed Hellion Vivian out. He closed his eyes and suppressed the bloodthirsty desire that arose from that thought. He vaguely had the urge to tear something to shreds. Fire Qilin was originally in the celestial boundary space adjusting the influence brought about by the resentment of Yin Qi just now, but suddenly felt the unstable martial qi flowing in Bailey Jia Ju's body, immediately showed its figure, and called out worriedly, "Master." Beligaju's eyes were calm, but those eyes were tainted with a faint demonic aura. Fire Qilin's claws paused. It thought in a muddled manner that perhaps today's matter was not entirely a bad thing for its master. Hellion Vivian also felt that something was wrong with Beligaju. She didn't know why, but that cold gaze coupled with the ivory robe made him look somewhat charming. Could it be that he was affected by the resentment just now? Hellion Vivian didn't stop at all. She reached out and grabbed Beligaju's arm. Looking at the bloodstains, she frowned. She directly plucked a handful of strawberries that grew from absorbing spiritual energy from the dimensional space, crushed them, and covered Beligaju's hand. The wound isn't very deep. It shouldn't be infected. Beligaju responded faintly and held her waist. In the darkness, no one could see, but the corner of his mouth raised slightly. Even if it was very subtle and difficult to detect, it was still a smile. It was different from the smile he had when he killed someone just now. In fact, the wound on his arm could be removed as long as he used his martial qi. But he realized that the anxious look on her face made people want to take another look. Therefore, he decided to leave the wound behind. When he saw the anger and anxiety on Helene Vivian's face when she saw that he was injured, that kind of subtle concern and nervousness filled his heart with an indescribable feeling. It was as if he was standing under the sun and the sun was shining down. From his body to the bottom of his heart, every part of him that was numb had come alive, causing his lips to unconsciously curve into an arc, tearing her thoughts apart. It was better to suppress it a little more. He viewed human life as a plaything and could sit and watch anyone die. But when it came to Helene Vivian, he just wanted to take something to lock her up so that she could only see him. It was still not enough, such a wonderful feeling, if he didn't monopolize it. He would always feel unsatisfied. When did this feeling of not being able to eat her fill start? Oh, right. When she reached out and lifted his chin for the first time and laughed lightly. All he wanted was to press her under his body and do whatever he wanted to her, but it didn't matter. He had time to slowly spend with her. He didn't miss those subtle physical reactions of hers. She couldn't escape. One day, he would be able to hear her cry for mercy under him. The more Beligaju thought about it, the bigger a certain part of him bulged. Even his breath carried a scorching heat, but his body didn't move at all. But that pair of eyes that could consign people to eternal damnation stared unblinkingly at Helene Vivian, from her slightly red neck to her heaving chest. Helene Vivian didn't know why, but she suddenly felt an unknown numbness in her tailbone. If it wasn't for her strong mental fortitude, she would definitely have let go of his hand and softened in his arms. Even her fingers that were bandaging were trembling. She didn't understand what was going on. It was all a certain highness's fault for looking at her so presumptuously. It was as if he was doing something to her. Moi, Beligaju, it's indeed a feast for the eyes. Helene Vivian was very happy. You finally realized my beauty. Beligaju slowly raised his eyebrows. I was talking about myself. Helene Vivian, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.